Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the murky, manure-caked world of medieval stables, and trust me, you're going to want to stay exactly where you are, tucked safely in your modern bed. Picture this. It's barely past 4 in the morning, pitch black except for a single sputtering tallow candle, and you're being literally kicked awake by a stable master whose breath could strip paint off a carriage. The smell hits you before consciousness dees a thick, humid wall of horse sweat, rotting straw, and fermenting dung that makes your eyes water and your stomach lurch. Welcome to your new life as a stable hand in the 1300s, where the phrase "living the dream" means you've successfully avoided being trampled to death for another day. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing this community spread across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The morning bell from the castle chapel clangs through the pre-dawn darkness, and you're already late. In medieval times, being late to stable duties isn't like snoozing your iPhone alarm and rolling into work with a sheepish grin and a Starbucks apology. No, you're immediately docked a portion of your already pathetic wages, maybe a quarter of a penny, which doesn't sound like much until you realize that's literally the price of your breakfast. The stable master, a grizzled man named Hugh who's missing 3 fingers from a horse bite in his youth, doesn't care that you were up until midnight yesterday hauling water. He doesn't care that the straw you sleep on is damp and crawling with things that bite. He cares that Lord Ashford's prized destrier needs to be ready for morning exercises, and if that horse isn't gleaming and fed by the time the sun breaks the horizon, Hugh's getting beaten, and Hugh will absolutely pass that beating down the chain to you. You stumble off your bed, really just a pile of old hay in the corner of the stable that you share with 2 other boys and a family of barn cats. The cats are actually the lucky ones. They're here for a job too, keeping the rat population down, but at least they get to sleep wherever they want. Your back aches from the packed earth floor, and there's a new pain in your left shoulder that you're trying to ignore because acknowledging injuries is a luxury for people who have the option of not working. The other stable hands are already moving in the darkness, shadows shuffling between the stalls with wooden buckets and armfuls of hay. Nobody speaks much this early. What's there to say? Good morning. Isn't it wonderful to be alive in this literal toilet we call a workplace? Yeah. No. The stable itself is a long, low building attached to the castle's outer ward. It's built from timber and wattleland. Delightful medieval construction technique where you weave sticks together and pack the gaps with a mixture of mud, straw, and animal dung. Yes, you read that right. The very walls around you contain horse manure. It's like living inside a giant, slightly leaky bathroom. During summer, the walls practically sweat, releasing a ripe aroma that would make a modern sanitation worker weep. During winter, they let in drafts that could freeze holy water, and you're expected to just deal with it because at least you have a roof. The ceiling is low enough that you can touch the beams, and those beams are black with decades of smoke from the small fires allowed inside during the coldest months. Historians still argue whether medieval stable conditions were intentionally kept warm and humid for the horse's benefit, or if that was just an unfortunate side effect of housing large animals in poorly ventilated buildings. But either way, you're living in what essentially amounts to a sauna filled with organic waste. Your first task before you've even had a drink of water, before you've relieved yourself in the communal ditch outside, before your eyes have fully adjusted to consciousnesses to start mucking out the stalls. But we'll get to the full horror of that in a moment. Right now, you need to understand the layout of your prison. Workplace. This particular stable houses about 20 horses, though that number fluctuates depending on whether the lord is preparing for war, hosting guests, or just feeling particularly wealthy. The horses are arranged by status, which you'll learn is the defining characteristic of absolutely everything in medieval life. At the far end, closest to the castle proper, are the destrier's massive warhorses worth more than your entire family's combined lifetime earnings. These beasts stand nearly 6 feet at the shoulder, weigh over a ton, and have temperaments that range from merely aggressive to actively homicidal. In the middle stalls, you've got the palfrey-riding horses for nobility, slightly smaller but still worth a fortune. These are the horses that ladies ride, that lords use for everyday travel, that visiting dignitaries arrive on. They're groomed to within an inch of their lives, their manes braided with ribbons, their hooves oiled until they shine. Then there are the rounceys, the all-purpose horses that actually do most of the work around here, pulling carts, carrying supplies, occasionally being ridden by important servants or minor knights. And finally, at your end of the stable, nearest to the door and therefore the coldest, draftiest section, are the pack horses and cart horses. These are the working-class heroes of the medieval horse world, and coincidentally, they're your responsibility. The social hierarchy of the stable is immediately clear and absolutely rigid. The head groom, that's Hugh. Our finger-challenged friend oversees everything and reports directly to the Lord's Marshal, who manages all the castle's horses and hounds. Below Hugh are 2 senior grooms who handle the destriers and palfreys exclusively. They wear relatively clean tunics, have actual leather boots instead of wrapped rags, and look at you with the kind of disdain usually reserved for plague victims. Then come the regular grooms, maybe 4 or 5 of them, who handle the rounceys and assist with the valuable horses. And then there's you and the other stable boys, the absolute bottom of the barrel, the muckers, the expendables. You're between 12 and 16 years old, most likely an orphan or from a family so poor they couldn't afford to keep you, and you've been sold into service for a term of 7 years in exchange for food, shelter, and the vague promise of learning a trade. The quirky thing about medieval stable boys, and this is a detail that doesn't make it into most history books, is that you're often chosen specifically for being small and lightweight. It's not just about squeezing into tight spaces or being easier to feed. There's a practical reason. You're frequently sent under the horses, between their legs, into positions where a larger person couldn't fit. Need to check a hoof abscess on a skittish destrier? Send the boy. Need to retrieve a dropped brush from under a 1,000-pound animal? That's a boy's job. Need someone to crawl into the hay loft to check for rot? Boy, you're essentially human pipe cleaners, flexible and disposable enough to risk in situations where a trained groom might actually be missed. The smell, though, let's come back to that because it deserves its own moment of horror. You've been in the stables for maybe 5 minutes now, and your nose is staging a full rebellion against your brain. Modern people, even those who've been around horses, simply cannot comprehend the olfactory assault of a medieval stable. Yes, horses today smell, but modern horses are bathed regularly. Their stalls are cleaned daily with actual shovels and wheelbarrows. They're fed processed grains and clean hay, and they live in barns with ventilation. Medieval horses? They're bathed maybe twice a year. They stand in their own waste for hours between mucking sessions. They're fed whatever hay was available, often moldy. And they live in buildings designed to trap heat and moisture. Add to that the fact that you, personally, haven't bathed in weeks. Neither has anyone else in here. The medieval concept of hygiene is, let's call it, evolving. There's a vague understanding that being too dirty might be unhealthy, but there's also a widespread belief that water can open your pores and let disease in. So really, you're safer just staying crusty. Your tunic, the same one you've worn for months, is stiff with dried sweat and ground in dirt. Your hair is matted and probably hosting its own ecosystem of lice. And you're about to spend the next 18 to 20 hours in intimate contact with horse bodily functions of every variety. Hugh appears beside you, seemingly materializing from the darkness like some kind of underfed, angry ghost. Stalls 1 through 6. He grunts, jerking his thumb toward your section. And the water trough's frozen again. Break it up. This is delivered without sympathy, without acknowledgement that breaking ice with your bare hands at 4 in the morning is the kind of thing that should come with hazard pay. He's already moving away, barking orders at another boy whose name you don't know and probably never will, because the turnover rate for stable boys is roughly equivalent to the mortality rate of medieval surgeons. You grab your tools, and I use that term generously. You've got a wooden pitchfork with tines that are cracked and splintering, a rope-handled bucket that leaks from 3 different spots, and a flat wooden paddle for scraping. No gloves, obviously. Gloves are for people with money, and you are definitively not people with money. Your hands are already calloused and cracked, with chilblains forming on your knuckles from the constant exposure to cold and wet. By the end of winter, if you make it that far, your hands will look like raw meat wrapped around bone. The first stall contains Bessie, a cart horse with a gentle disposition and one milky eye. She's actually one of your favorites, if you're allowed to have favorites among animals you're forced to serve. She whickers softly as you enter, her breath steaming in the cold air, and for just a moment, you feel something like peace. Then you look down at the floor of her stall and remember why you're here. The packed earth is covered in a mixture of old straw, fresh straw, horse urine, and several impressive piles of manure. This isn't the worst you've seen. That honor goes to stall 4, which houses a gelding with digestive issues, but it's still a solid hour of work. And you have 5 more stalls after this. Here's something they don't tell you in the romantic medieval tales. Horse urine is alkaline, and when it mixes with the decomposing straw and manure, it creates ammonia gas. In an enclosed, poorly ventilated stable, this gas builds up overnight until the air quality is somewhere between industrial accident and war crime. Your eyes are already watering, and you've barely started. The ammonia burns your throat with each breath, making you cough. And coughing hurts because you probably have some kind of respiratory infection that's been circulating through the stable boys for weeks. But you can't stop to recover. The sun is coming. The Lord will want his morning ride. And if you're not done by then, well, Hughes demonstrated what happens to slow workers, and you still have full use of all your fingers. You'd like to keep it that way. You begin the mucking process, and we'll dive deeper into this special circle of hell in the next section. But even these first few minutes tell you everything you need to know about your new life. This isn't a job. It's a sentence. This isn't employment. It's survival. And the worst part? This is only dawn. You haven't even reached the truly difficult parts of the day yet. Your stomach is empty. Your body is already aching. And you've got 16 more hours of this ahead of you. The romantic notion of working with noble steeds, of being part of castle life, of maybe catching a glimpse of a tournament or a feast that dies quickly when you're standing knee-deep in manure, breathing air that could probably be classified as a biological weapon, and realizing that this is your every single day for the next 7 years. Welcome to medieval stable life. Try not to think too hard about how you're going to survive until breakfast. If breakfast even happens. You plunge the wooden pitchfork into the first pile of manure, and immediately one of the tines cracks a little further. By your estimate, you've got maybe 3 more days before this fork becomes completely useless, and then you'll be mucking stalls with your bare hands until someone decides you're worth a replacement tool. The manure is cold, which is somehow worse than when it's fresh and warm. At least warm dung doesn't cling to everything quite so aggressively. This stuff has the consistency of clay mixed with straw, and it sticks to the wooden tines like it's personally offended by your attempt to remove it. You heave the forkful toward your leaking bucket, miss by about 6 inches because it's still dark and your aim isn't great, and watch a chunk of medieval horse waste splatter across your already disgusting feet. Here's a fun fact that definitely won't help you sleep. A single horse produces between 40 and 50 pounds of manure every single day. 50 pounds. That's like, I don't know, a medium-sized dog's worth of poop. Per horse. Per day. You're responsible for 6 horses in this morning rotation, which means you're dealing with roughly 300 pounds of feces before the sun even thinks about making an appearance. And that's just this morning. You'll be back this afternoon for another round because horses, bless their massive digestive systems, don't stop producing waste just because you've already cleaned. They're like biological manure factories running on a 24-hour schedule. And you're the quality control department, except instead of controlling quality, you're just scooping. The technique for mucking a stall is deceptively simple in theory. You separate the soiled straw from the clean straw, remove the manure and urine-soaked bedding, scrape down to the packed earth floor, let it air out briefly, then lay down fresh straw. In practice, it's like trying to sort coffee grounds from dirt while wearing oven mitts and standing in a poorly lit closet. The straw is all mixed together. Some of it is cleanish. Some of it is damp with urine. Some of it is essentially composting into a primitive form of papier-mâché. Your job is to make judgment calls about what can be reused and what needs to go on the muck heap. And you need to make these calls quickly because time is not your friend. You develop a rhythm. Stab, lift, toss, scrape, repeat, stab, lift, toss, scrape, repeat. It's meditative in the way that being waterboarded is technically a bath. Your arms are burning within 15 minutes because that wooden fork, even broken and pathetic as it is, gets heavy when you're lifting it 40 or 50 times per stall. Your lower back starts to scream because you're constantly bent over. The ceiling is too low to stand fully upright while working, and Bessie takes up most of the stall space anyway. She's very kindly moved to one corner to give you room, but even so, you're working in an area about 8 feet by 10 feet, and you can't afford to waste any of it. The bucket fills up well. Fills up is generous considering the leaks, and you have to haul it outside to the muck heap. This is its own special adventure. The muck heap is located approximately 50 yards from the stable entrance. Downwind when the wind is cooperating and directly upwind when the universe wants to remind you of your place in the cosmic order. It's a growing mountain of horse waste, old straw, and miscellaneous stable debris that will eventually be sold to farmers for fertilizer. Yes, your manure has economic value. No, you don't see any of that money. The pile is currently about 12 feet high and growing daily, and there's a primitive pathway worn into its side where you and the other boys trudge up and down, adding to humanity's least impressive monument. The walk to the muck heap in the pre-dawn darkness is treacherous. The ground is frozen in patches, muddy in others, and occasionally both simultaneously in a way that seems to violate the laws of physics. You're carrying a bucket that's leaking a trail behind you like the world's worst breadcrumb system, and you're trying not to think about the fact that you're essentially wearing shoes made of rags wrapped around your feet. No grip, no insulation, no protection. You slip twice on the way to the heap, catch yourself both times, but the second slip sends a jolt through your ankle that promises to be a problem later. At the muck heap, you heave your bucket's contents onto the pile, and a gust of wind immediately blows some of it back into your face. Of course it does. This is your life now. You wipe your face with your sleeve, which just spreads the filth around more evenly, and trudge back to the stable. The other boys pass you on the path, heading to and from the heap in a constant procession like ants servicing their colony. Except ants probably have better working conditions and definitely better dental plans. Back in Bessie's stall, you've made a decent dent in the mess, but now you're facing the wet patches. Horse urine soaks into the packed earth floor and creates these ammonia-rich puddles that need to be scraped up and left to dry. You use your wooden paddle, basically a flat board with a handledo, scrape the wet earth into piles that you'll remove later. This process releases fresh waves of ammonia that make your eyes water even more aggressively than before. You're crying and you don't even know it. The tears just mix with the sweat and general face grime into a sort of biological soup running down your cheeks. Here's where it gets interesting from a historical perspective. Historians still argue whether medieval stable practices actually contributed to the health of horses or slowly poisoned them. Some scholars point to the fact that many medieval warhorses lived relatively long lives. 15 to 20 years wasn't uncommon for a well-cared, for Distriera's evidence that the practices worked. Others argue that the constant exposure to ammonia, the damp conditions, and the recycled bedding created respiratory problems, hoof infections, and a host of other issues that were just accepted as normal because nobody knew any better. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. The horses that survived were tough as nails, and the ones that didn't, well, you saw them collapse and get dragged out to be butchered for dog meat. You finish Bessie's stall and move on to stall 2, which houses Thunder Arouncy with a personality that matches his dramatic name. Thunder is less cooperative than Bessie, which means instead of moving politely to one corner, he's decided to stand directly in the middle of his stall, occasionally shifting his weight in a way that suggests he might step on you at any moment. You try to work around him, squeezing between his massive body and the wall, and this is where being small and young is supposedly an advantage. You can fit in spaces that Hugh couldn't manage. Of course, you can also be crushed in spaces that Hugh is too smart to enter, but that's not really discussed in your job training, which consisted of do this or be beaten. Thunder decides, just as you're reaching under him to grab a particularly stubborn clump of soiled straw, that this is the perfect moment to urinate. You hear it before you feel Ida sound like someone opening a fire hose, and then the warm stream is splashing onto the floor inches from your hand, creating an instant puddle that begins flowing toward you with the inevitability of fate. You scramble backward, but not before your sleeve drags through the edge of it. The smell of fresh horse urine is sharp and acrid, like ammonia's angrier cousin, and it's now soaked into your tunic. You'll smell like this all day, all week, probably, because it's not like you have a change of clothes waiting in your luxury accommodations. The quirky historical tidbit that makes this all so much more fun? Medieval people actually believed that horse urine had medicinal properties. Not kidding. There are documented cases of physicians recommending horse urine for everything from skin conditions to baldness. Some barbers would even pay stable hands for collection rights. You'd think this would be good news, a side hustle, a little extra income, but no. The barbers pay the stable master, who definitely doesn't share that wealth with you. So you get to be soaked in the stuff without even the consolation of profiting from your misery. You power through Thunderstall, which takes longer because he's being difficult and because there's just more waste than Bessie produced. Some horses are more prolific defecators than others, and Thunder is apparently going for a personal record. By the time you finish, you've made 4 trips to the muck heap. Your arms feel like wet rope, and you still have 4 more stalls to go. The sky outside is starting to show the barest hint of gray-knot sunrise, just the promise that sunrise will eventually happen, and you can hear the castle beginning to wake up. Roosters are crowing, which is ironic because you're pretty sure you hate roosters now. Anything that sounds that cheerful about morning is clearly mentally unwell. Stall 3 is home to Daisy, a pack horse with a sweet temperament and the unfortunate habit of eating her own bedding, which means her stall is always extra gross. Stall 4, as mentioned, belongs to the gelding with digestive issues. His name is Spot, which is cutesy until you realize it refers to the spots of chronic diarrhea that decorate his stall like the world's worst art installation. You take a deep breath before entering Spot's domain, which is a mistake because breathing deeply near Spot's stall is like volunteering for a chemical attack. The smell is beyond description. It transcends mere manure and enters the realm of biological warfare. You work as quickly as possible in Spot's stall, trying to breathe through your mouth, but that just means you can taste the air, which is somehow worse. You're scooping what can only be described as liquid nightmare, and your bucket is working overtime trying to leak it all back out. You make 6 trips to the muck heap from this one stall alone, and by the end, you're pretty sure you've lost a layer of skin from your hands due to the acidic nature of whatever Spot's producing. Stalls 5 and 6 go relatively smoothly. A couple of cart horses named Barley and Oats who are professionals at this point and mostly stay out of your way. By the time you finish, the first rays of actual sunlight are creeping through the stable's small, poorly glazed windows. You've been working for nearly 2 hours. You've moved approximately 400 pounds of manure, and you haven't had so much as a sip of water. Your reward for this Herculean effort? You get to start laying fresh straw, which sounds easier than mucking but comes with its own set of challenges. The straw is kept in the loft above the stable, and accessing it requires climbing a ladder that's missing several rungs. You climb carefully, testing each rung, because falling and breaking something means you can't work, and not working means you don't eat. The loft is dark, dusty, and home to an aggressive population of mice who are not happy about your intrusion. They scatter as you enter, squeaking their displeasure, and you grab an armful of straw from the nearest pile. The straw is scratchy against your already raw skin, and there's always the risk of finding something unpleasant nested in Eat a Dead Mouse, a snake, once memorably a family of rats who took personal offense to your presence. You make multiple trips up and down the ladder, your arms full of straw, distributing it across the 6 stalls you've just cleaned. The art of laying straw is to create a layer thick enough to absorb the coming day's worth of waste, but not so thick that you're wasting resources. Hugh will actually inspect your work, and if he decides you've been too generous with the bedding, you'll hear about it, loudly, possibly while he demonstrates his educational approach to training, which involves hitting you with whatever's handy. Each stall gets about 4 or 5 armfuls of straw, spread evenly across the floor, fluffed up to make it look fuller than it is. The horses watch you work with varying degrees of interest. Bessie seems grateful. Thunder seems indifferent. Spot seems to be planning his next digestive catastrophe. By the time you finish, you're covered head to toe in bits of straw, dust, manure residue, and regret. The sun is fully up now, streaming through the windows in dusty beams that would be beautiful if you had the energy to appreciate beauty, which you don't. And here's the kicker, the thing that really drives home how absolutely endless this task is. You get to do this all again this afternoon. The whole process. 6 stalls, 300 pounds of manure, countless trips to the muck heap, the ladder, the straw, everything. Because horses don't stop being biological waste factories just because you've cleaned up after them once. They're just getting started. Your morning shift of mucking is done, but there's an afternoon shift waiting for you like a terrible sequel that nobody asked for. You look at the 6 clean stalls, at the fresh straw, at the horses settling into their refreshed spaces, and you feel absolutely nothing. No pride in a job well done. No satisfaction in completing a difficult task. Just a hollow exhaustion and the certain knowledge that this is your life now. This is every morning. This is the price of food and shelter in medieval times when you're unlucky enough to be born poor and expendable. The other stable boys are finishing their sections too. Everyone moving with the same mechanical exhaustion. Nobody speaks. What would you even say? Great manure today. Really had some substance to it? You're all just trying to survive until the next meal, trying not to think about how many more years of this stretch ahead of you. 7 years of your service contract feels like a death sentence delivered one shovelful at a time. Hugh appears, inspecting the work with his critical eye and remaining fingers. He grunts his approval at your section, which is the closest thing to praise you're likely to receive. Then he barks the next set of orders: water and feed, move. And just like that, your brief moment of completion evaporates. The work continues. It always continues. Your hands are bleeding from small cuts you didn't notice getting. Your back is screaming. Your feet are wet and cold and probably developing something fungal. And the actual day with all its additional tasks and dangers and opportunities for injurious only just beginning. The feeding process in a medieval stable is less about nourishment and more about navigating a rigid caste system where one mistake can get you maimed, Fired. Or both. You're standing in front of the feed room, a small chamber off the main stable that's kept locked because apparently horse feed is more valuable than you are waiting for Hugh to unlock it with the iron key. He keeps on a cord around his neck. The feed room is where the social hierarchy of the stable becomes painfully, explicitly clear, because not all horses eat equally, and you're about to learn exactly how much a night's warhorse is worth compared to your miserable existence. Hugh swings open the door, and you're hit with a smell that's actually pleasant for once grain. Dried herbs, a hint of honey. It's the nicest thing you've smelled in hours, which tells you exactly how low your standards have fallen. Inside the feed room, everything is organized with a precision that borders on obsessive. There are different barrels for different qualities of oats, separate bins for barley, dried peas, and beans, clay pots of supplements and treatments, and hanging bundles of hay that's been selected for quality rather than just grabbed from whatever pile was convenient. This is where the money is stored. Essentially, these ingredients represent a significant portion of the castle's operating budget, and every grain is accounted for. Destriers first. Hugh growls, pointing to a specific barrel marked with a red painted cross. 2 measures of oats, 1 of barley, 1 of beans, mixed with chopped hay. Add a handful of the herb mix from the blue pot, and Sir Geoffrey's horse gets a half measure of honey mixed in because the beast won't eat otherwise. He's rattling this off like you're supposed to memorize a recipe that would make a modern nutritionist weep with joy. These warhorses eat better than most peasants, actually. Scratch that. These horses definitely eat better than you do. You're lucky if you get porridge and stale bread. These horses are getting a balanced diet of complex carbohydrates, proteins, natural supplements, and luxury sweeteners. You grab the wooden measuring scoop, different sizes for different ingredients. Of course, because nothing in medieval life can be simple, and start preparing the first destrier's meal. 2 scoops of oats go into a leather bucket. The oats are actually good quality, probably imported, definitely expensive. 1 scoop of barley, which is smaller and harder and makes a satisfying sound as it pours. 1 scoop of beans, which have been dried and will need to be softened by the horse's digestion. You mix these together with your hands, feeling the different textures, and then add chopped hay from a specific pile that Hugh indicates. This isn't the regular hay that gets tossed around carelessly. This is hay that's been inspected, sorted, and deemed worthy of noble horse consumption. The herb mix from the blue pot is a mystery blend of things you can't identify. You recognize mint by smell, maybe some fennel, possibly chamomile. There's other stuff in there that could be anything from medicinal plants to expensive spices. A handful goes into the bucket, not too much. Hugh warns, because apparently you can overseason a horse's breakfast and cause digestive upset, which in a 1,000-pound animal is not a minor inconvenience. Then comes the honey for Sir Geoffrey's precious beast, a massive black destrier named Darkness who has a reputation for being both magnificent and absolutely terrible. The honey is thick and golden and worth more than your monthly wages, assuming you actually got paid wages instead of just room and board. You drizzle it in, mix everything together with a wooden paddle, and carry the bucket toward the destrier stalls. This is where things get dangerous. Destriers are not friendly horses. They're not meant to be. These are war machines, bred and trained for aggression, for charging into battle, for trampling infantry and crashing into enemy lines. They're stallions, which means they're territorial, aggressive, and prone to biting and kicking anything they perceive as a threat, which, from their perspective, includes you. You're a small, unfamiliar creature entering their space carrying food, and their brains are processing this as either potential mate, no, potential challenger, possibly, or potential prey, most likely. None of these options end well for you. You approach Darkness's stall with the kind of caution usually reserved for approaching sleeping dragons. The horse is already awake. Destriers sleep less than regular horses. Another fun quirk of their breeding, and he's watching you with eyes that hold what you swear is malicious intelligence. He's enormous up close, easily 16 hands high, with a thick muscular neck and hooves the size of dinner plates. His ears are pinned back slightly, which you've learned is horse language for, "I'm annoyed and considering violence." You clear your throat, trying to make yourself known without startling him, and slide the feed bucket into the stall using a long wooden pole with a hook on the end. This is the safest method. You don't actually enter the stall. You just use the pole to position the bucket within eating range. Darkness watches this process with what seems like disdain, then steps forward and deliberately kicks the bucket, sending expensive grain and honey scattering across his freshly cleaned stall. He's done this before. You can tell by the way Hugh doesn't even look surprised when you report back. "He does that," Hugh says, as if this explains anything. "Give him 10 minutes, then go in and set up another bucket. He'll eat the second one once he's made his point." His point being what, exactly? That he's a spoiled, aggressive monster who wastes food for fun? That he can terrorize stable boys without consequence? You don't ask these questions because questioning things is not part of your job description. While Darkness is presumably feeling very satisfied with himself, you move on to the other destriers. There are 3 more in total. Sir Robert's bay stallion named Valor, Lord Ashford's own grey beast called Tempest, and a younger destrier named Brutus who's still in training. Each gets the same expensive grain mixture: 2 oats, 1 barley, 1 beans, herbs, though Brutus gets less honey because he's younger and apparently hasn't earned the right to maximum sweetness. The feeding process for these 4 horses alone takes nearly an hour, and you've barely made a dent in the total population. Here's a quirky historical fact that makes this whole process even more frustrating. Medieval horse feed was sometimes enriched with wine. Not for all horses. Obviously that would be wasteful, but for valuable destriers who were off their feed or recovering from illness, wine was mixed into their grain to stimulate appetite and strengthen the blood. You've never seen this happen because none of the current destriers are sick, but one of the older stable boys swears he once watched Hugh pour a full bottle of decent wine into a feed bucket while the entire stable staff hadn't had a drink in weeks. The horse economy is real, and you are on the wrong side of it. Next comes the palfreys, riding horses for nobility. These are in the middle section of the stable, and while they're not as aggressive as destriers, they're still worth enough that injuring one would probably result in your execution. The palfreys get a slightly different mixture: 1½ measures of oats, half of barley, and chopped hay, but no beans and no honey. They're working horses, but refined ones, bred for smooth gaits and gentle temperaments. Lady Ashford's palfrey, a pretty dappled mare named Moonbeam, actually seems pleased to see you, which is jarring after dealing with Darkness's psychological warfare. You pour her feed into her bucket attached to the stall wall, much more sensible, and she immediately begins eating with delicate, appreciative bites. The other palfreys are similarly civilized. They eat their breakfast like functional animals rather than feudal lords, and you find yourself relaxing slightly. This is a mistake, because relaxation in a medieval stable is an invitation for disaster. As you're pouring grain for the 4th palfrey, a gelding named Frost, one of the senior grooms, appears behind you. "Wrong mixture," he says flatly. You look down at the bucket in confusion. It's the palfrey mixture, exactly as Hugh described. Frost is being prepared for Lady Margaret's visit. He needs the full destrier preparation to look his best. Hugh should have told you. Hugh did not tell you. Hugh tells you almost nothing, expecting you to somehow intuit information through sheer desperation. But arguing with a senior groom is like arguing with a stone wall, except the wall might be more sympathetic. You dump the perfectly good palfrey feed back into your mixing bucket. Waste is not allowed. Everything gets reused and trudged back to the feed room to prepare the expensive destrier mixture. This means another trip, more time, and the knowledge that you're now behind schedule. Being behind schedule means the next tasks get compressed, which means you'll be rushing, which means you'll make mistakes, which means punishment. It's a wonderful system designed to ensure maximum suffering. By the time you finish the palfreys, your arms are aching from carrying heavy buckets, and you're only halfway through feeding time. The rounceys are next, the all-purpose horses that actually do most of the real work around the estate. These horses pull plows, carry supplies, serve as riding mounts for servants and minor officials, and generally keep the entire medieval economy functioning. And naturally, they get the worst feed. 1 measure of oats mixed with chaff, basically the leftover bits from threshing grain and whatever hay is available. No barley, no beans, definitely no honey or herbs or wine. Just basic fuel to keep them functional. You move through the rounceys quickly because their feeding routine is simple and they're generally too tired to cause problems. Thunder gets his bucket and immediately sticks his face in it. The others follow suit. There's no drama here. No demanding specific preparations or kicking buckets or requiring wine supplements. These are working-class horses, and they're just grateful for food. You empathize with them more than you'd like to admit. Finally, you reach your section, the pack horses and cart horses at the far end. Bessie, Daisy, Barley, Spot, and a couple of others whose names you haven't learned yet because they're rotated out frequently. These horses get the absolute minimum. Straight oats, not even good oats, mixed with chaff and whatever hay is too poor quality for the expensive horses. The measuring scoop for this section is noticeably smaller than the ones used for destriers. Even in feeding portions, the hierarchy is maintained. A destrier might get 6 or 7 pounds of grain per feeding, a palfrey 4 or 5 pounds, a rouncey 3 pounds, and your pack horses get maybe 2 pounds of actual grain mixed with a lot of filler. Spot, the digestively challenged gelding, gets his sad portion of grain, and you can't help but think it's probably not helping his condition. But horse nutrition is determined by value, not need. If Spot were worth more, he'd eat better and might not have chronic diarrhea. But he's a pack horse, so he gets pack horse feed, and his intestinal distress is just accepted as the natural order of things. Historians still argue whether medieval horse feeding practices were based on any real understanding of equine nutrition or just economic necessity dressed up as wisdom. Some records suggest that experienced stable masters did understand the connection between diet and performance. They knew that warhorses needed more protein and energy, that working horses needed different nutrition than riding horses. Other evidence suggests it was purely about status. Expensive horses got expensive feed because that's what expensive things deserved, not because anyone understood nutrition. The truth, as usual, is probably a mix of both practical knowledge and rigid social hierarchy. You're finishing up the last of the pack horses when you hear a commotion from the destrier section. Darkness, having made his point and waited his required 10 minutes, is now screaming, actually screaming, a sound like a horse having an existential crisis because his second bucket hasn't appeared. Hugh is already yelling for you, and you abandon the last pack horse halfway through feeding to rush back to the destrier stalls. You grab another bucket, mix the expensive grain with shaking hands because Hugh is standing right behind you radiating fury, add the honey, and practically run to Darkness's stall. This time, you have to actually enter the stall because the pole isn't within reach and Darkness has positioned himself in a way that makes pole feeding impossible. You're about to walk into an enclosed space with an aggressive stallion who's already demonstrated his willingness to kick buckets and, by extension, probably you. You take a breath, open the stall door just wide enough to slip through, and step inside with the bucket. Darkness is directly in front of you, ears still pinned, nostrils flared. You're supposed to move slowly, confidently, showing no fear, all things that are impossible when you're a terrified teenager facing down a horse that could kill you with one well-placed kick. You edge along the wall, keeping the bucket between you and the horse, trying to reach the feeding corner. Darkness watches you with those intelligent, malicious eyes, and then, because the universe hates Yoha, lunges forward, teeth bared. You drop the bucket, grain and honey spilling everywhere again, and throw yourself sideways, slamming into the stall wall hard enough to knock the wind out of your lungs. Darkness stops short of actually biting you, snatches a mouthful of the spilled grain, and returns to his corner, chewing smugly. Hugh drags you out of the stall by your collar. You're expecting violence, but instead he just looks tired. Third bucket, he says quietly, and this time, I'll come with you. The fact that he's willing to risk his own safety to ensure Darkness gets fed tells you everything you need to know about the value system here. The horse must eat his expensive grain. Your survival is optional, but the horse's breakfast is mandatory. The third attempt succeeds, mostly because Hugh positions himself in a way that blocks Darkness from approaching you, and you're able to set the bucket down and escape without injury. The grain is eaten, finally, and you've only wasted 2 full portions of expensive feed and nearly gotten yourself killed. All before the morning is half over. Your hands are shaking, your shoulder hurts from hitting the wall, and you still have water duty ahead of you. But first, you get to clean up the spilled grain from Darkness's stall, which means going back in there, sweeping up honey-covered oats and barley while he watches you with what you're certain is amusement. You work quickly, silently, collecting every possible grain because waste of expensive feed is a beating offense. Some of this will be mixed into the packhorse's next meal waste, not even though it's now covered in straw and horse saliva. Feeding time is finally complete. Every horse has been served according to their station. You've survived another encounter with Darkness, and the morning is progressing toward its next phase of suffering. Your reward for successfully navigating the feeding hierarchy? You get to haul water, which sounds simple until you remember that water is heavy. Horses drink a lot of it, and the well is very, very far away. The grooming process begins immediately after feeding, which is actually strategic. Horses are calmer with full stomachs, less likely to bite or kick when they're contentedly digesting their breakfast. Less likely doesn't mean unlikely, though, and you're about to spend the next several hours in intimate physical contact with animals that outweigh you by roughly 10 to 1 and have approximately 0 concern for your continued existence. You gather your grooming tools, which is a generous term for what amounts to a collection of primitive torture devices that hurt your hands almost as much as they clean the horses. Your grooming kit consists of a curry comb made from a piece of wood with leather strips nailed to it in rows, a body brush that's essentially pig bristles attached to a wooden block, a mane comb carved from bone with half its teeth missing, a hoof pick that's just a bent nail driven through a piece of wood, and several handfuls of straw for the final polish. That's it. No fancy equipment, no specialized tools, nothing that would make this job easier or safer. Medieval horse grooming is a full-contact sport played with inadequate equipment and minimal training. You start, as always, with your section, the pack horses and cart horses, who are less likely to kill you and therefore serve as your warm-up before moving to the more valuable and exponentially more dangerous animals. Bessie is first, and she's already dozing in her stall, one hip cocked, lower lip drooping in that way horses do when they're truly relaxed. You enter her stall quietly, speaking in low tones that you've learned help keep horses calm. "Morning, Bess," you murmur, and she opens one eye slightly, acknowledges your existence with a small ear flick, then goes back to dozing. This is about as good as it gets. You begin with the curry comb, starting at her neck and working in circular motions to lift the dirt, dried sweat, and dead skin from her coat. The curry comb is rough, it has to be to do its job, and you can feel it catching on the matted sections of her winter coat. Medieval horses don't get clipped or trimmed. They grow thick, shaggy coats in winter that become absolutely filthy over the course of months. Bessie's coat is currently a mixture of brown hair, caked mud from weeks ago, bits of straw, and what you're pretty sure is dried manure from when she laid down in her stall yesterday. All of this needs to come off, and all of it is embedded in her hair like nature's most disgusting felt. The circular motions required for curry combing are harder than they look. You have to apply enough pressure to actually loosen the dirt without hurting the horse, which means your wrist, forearm, and shoulder are doing constant rotating work. Within 5 minutes, your arm is burning. Within 10, you're switching hands. Within 15, both arms are trembling and you've only finished one side of her neck. Bessie is a small horse by medieval standards, maybe 14 hands, but she's still got a lot of surface area, and every inch of it is filthy. Here's something that won't help you feel better about this. Medieval horses were rarely bathed. Maybe twice a year, if that, and usually only the valuable ones before important events. The rest of the time, grooming was the only cleaning they got, which means you're dealing with months of accumulated grime. The curry comb pulls up clouds of dust, hair, and skin particles that make you cough and get in your eyes and mouth. You're essentially dry shampooing a horse using leather straps and elbow grease, and it's about as effective as you'd imagine. Which is to say, not very. After the curry comb comes the body brush, and this is where the actual cleaning happens. The pig bristles are stiff enough to sweep away the dirt that the curry comb loosened, and you work in long, smooth strokes following the direction of hair growth. Neck, shoulder, barrel, hindquarters tertiu develop a rhythm, brush and flick, sending dirt and hair flying with each stroke. The body brush needs to be cleaned constantly because it fills up with debris, so you're stopping every few strokes to bang it against the stall wall, releasing a cloud of filth that settles right back onto the horse. It's a Sisyphean task, but at least Sisyphus only had to deal with a boulder, not a boulder covered in organic waste. Bessie's legs come next, and this is where being a stable boy becomes actively dangerous even with the gentle horses. To clean a horse's legs, you have to bend down or crouch next to them, positioning yourself in the perfect spot to be kicked if they get startled or annoyed. Horses can kick with about 2,000 pounds of force. You weigh maybe 90 pounds soaking wet. The math on this is not in your favor. You run the brush down her front legs carefully, checking for heat or swelling that might indicate injury, cleaning the dried mud from her fetlocks and pasterns. Then you move to the back legs, which requires you to stand beside her hindquarters. Run your hand down her leg to let her know you're there, and hope she doesn't decide this is the moment to practice her field goal kicking. One of the quirky bits of medieval horse wisdom that actually makes sense. You're taught to always keep one hand on the horse while you work. This way, if they decide to kick or move suddenly, you can feel the muscle tension building and maybe get out of the way in time. It doesn't always work. You've seen another stable boy get kicked in the ribs last month, heard the crack from across the stable, watched him curl up on the ground struggling to breathe while Hugh decided if he was worth fetching the barber surgeon for. He lived, eventually returned to work with a permanent wheeze, and now moves extra carefully around the horse's back ends. The hooves are the most critical part of grooming, and also the most dangerous. You have to pick up each hoof, which means convincing a 1,000-pound animal to shift all their weight off one foot and trust you to hold it and then dig out the packed dirt, manure, and stones using your bent nail hoof pick. With Bessie, this is relatively straightforward. You squeeze her chestnut gently, she lifts her hoof, you brace it against your knee and start picking. The hoof pick scrapes out a mixture of materials that would make a geologist weep. Clay soil, gravel, straw, compacted manure, sometimes small rocks that have gotten wedged in there. All of this has to come out because packed material in a hoof can cause infections, abscesses, or lameness, and a lame horse is a worthless horse. Medieval farrier knowledge is actually surprisingly sophisticated in some ways. They understood that hoof health was critical, that moisture balance mattered, that certain herbs could treat infections. But they also believed that shoeing a horse during certain phases of the moon would make the shoes fall off, and that horse hoof trimmings could be burned to ward off evil spirits. So it's a mixed bag of practical wisdom and absolute nonsense. You're just trying not to get kicked in the face while removing decomposed organic matter from the underside of a hoof. So the moon phases and evil spirits are not your primary concern. Bessie's mane and tail come last. The bone comb is missing half its teeth, which makes detangling approximately impossible. So mostly you just pull straw and debris out by hand and hope for the best. Her tail is a matted mess. Tails collect burrs, get stepped on, are used by horses to swat flies and then dragged through manure, but you work through it patiently because tail pulling can make even gentle horses kick. You separate the strands as best you can, remove the obvious debris, and call it done. It's not pretty, but Bessie is a cart horse. Nobody expects her to look like she's going to a tournament. The final step is the straw polish, where you grab handfuls of clean straw and rub down the entire horse to remove the last bits of dust and add a bit of shine to the coat. This actually works reasonably well. The straw has a slightly abrasive quality that buffs the hair, and by the end, Bessie looks notably cleaner than when you started. Not clean by modern standards, but definitely cleaner by medieval ones, which is the best you can hope for. She's also left a massive pile of hair and dirt on the stall floor that you'll need to sweep up later, but that's a future you problem. 1 horse down, 19 to go. You move through the pack horses with increasing fatigue. Daisy is cooperative but has sensitive skin, so you have to be gentler with the curry comb, which means it takes longer. Barley has a habit of leaning his full weight against you while you're working, which is his way of being affectionate but also means you're essentially bench pressing a horse while trying to groom it. Oats won't pick up his back feet without a fight, so each hoof becomes a negotiation that you usually lose. Poor Spot has crusted filth around his hindquarters from his digestive issues that requires extra work and extra gagging on your part. By the time you finish your 6 horses, you're covered in hair, dust, and sweat despite the cold. Your hands are raw from gripping the wooden tools. Your back is screaming from all the bending and crouching. And you've been kicked once, just a glancing blow from Oats that caught your thigh and will definitely be a bruise tomorrow. But the pack horses are done. And now comes the real challenge. Grooming the valuable horses under the supervision of senior grooms who will critique every stroke and possibly beat you if you make a mistake. You're assigned to help with the rouncies, which is apparently a privilege since you're usually not allowed near anything worth more than a season's grain. The senior groom watching you is named Peter, and he's only slightly less terrifying than Hugh. You'll do the initial curry work. He tells you, I'll finish with the body brush and handle the legs and hooves. Touch the mane or tail and I'll break your fingers. This is probably not hyperbole. The rouncy you're working on is a gelding named Copper, and he immediately demonstrates why he needs a senior groom present. As soon as you start with the curry comb, he pins his ears and swings his head around to bite you. Peter smacks him on the shoulder with the body brush hard enough to get attention but not hard enough to injure, and Copper settles slightly. He does that, Peter says, which seems to be the explanation for all horse misbehavior. Don't flinch. He smells fear and gets worse. Don't flinch, right? You continue curry combing while Copper periodically tries to bite you, step on you, or lean away so you can barely reach. Every muscle in your body is tense, waiting for the next attack, which makes the circular curry motions even more exhausting. Peter watches critically, occasionally barking corrections. More pressure on the shoulder. You're barely touching him. Faster circles. We don't have all day. You missed a spot there. No there. Are you blind? The rouncies take twice as long as the pack horses because everything has to be done to a higher standard. The curry work has to be thorough. The brush strokes have to be perfect, and Peter inspects every inch before declaring it acceptable. You do the preliminary work on 3 roundsies total, and by the end your arms are shaking so badly you can barely hold the tools. Peter dismisses you with a grunt that might be approval or might just be acknowledgement that you still exist. Now comes the part you've been dreading, the destriers. You're not actually allowed to groom them. That's a job for the most senior grooms only, but you are required to prepare the grooming area and assist. This means setting up a grooming stall, which is a section of the stable with extra space and better light, laying out the premium grooming tools, actual metal curry combs, brushes with boar bristles, ivory combs for mane and tail, and then standing by to hand things to the head groom while he works. Hugh handles darkness personally, and you watch from a safe distance as he approaches the massive black stallion. Even Hugh, who fears nothing, moves carefully around this horse. He speaks in low, constant tones, keeps one hand on darkness at all times, and has a wooden club hanging from his belt just in case. The grooming process for a destrier is elaborate. Takes nearly an hour per horse because every detail matters. These horses are seen in public, ridden in tournaments, displayed as symbols of wealth and power. They need to gleam. You hand Hugh tools as requested: curry comb, body brush, finishing brush, mane comb, a cloth dampened with oil for adding shine. You watch as he transforms darkness from a merely clean horse into something that actually looks magnificent. The black coat begins to shine. Muscles become visible under the glossy hair. The mane falls in smooth waves. It's actually impressive what proper grooming with proper tools can achieve. It's also infuriating because you know your pack horses could look this good if anyone cared enough to invest the time and equipment. Historians still argue whether the elaborate grooming of warhorses was purely aesthetic or if it served practical purposes. Some evidence suggests that the intensive grooming helped identify injuries and skin conditions early, potentially saving valuable animals. Other sources indicate it was entirely about status, a way to display wealth and power through the visible care of expensive animals. Probably both are true, but standing here handing tools to Hugh while your arms tremble with exhaustion, you're pretty sure the status explanation is winning. The other destriers receive similar treatment from other senior grooms. You assist where needed, mostly by holding horses, fetching tools, or sweeping up the enormous piles of hair and dirt that accumulate. Even with experienced grooms, destriers are dangerous. You watch Valor try to bite his groom, see Tempest kick out at a shadow, observe Brutus rearing slightly when a mouse runs past. These are barely controlled violence machines, and grooming them is like defusing a bomb that might explode at any moment. The palfreys are next, and these are at least calmer. Lady Ashford's Moonbeam actually seems to enjoy being groomed, leaning into the brush strokes, lowering her head for the face cleaning. The grooms working on palfreys can relax slightly, work more efficiently, even chat quietly while they brush. It's still skilled work. These horses need to look perfect, but it's not the constant life-threatening challenge that destriers present. By the time all 20 horses are groomed, it's well past midday. You've been working for 8 hours straight, with no break, no food, just constant physical labor in close proximity to large animals. Your hands are bleeding from gripping wooden tools. Your arms feel like wet rope. Your back might be permanently bent into a crouch, and you smell like you've been rolling in a horse, which, technically, you kind of have been. Your reward for completing grooming? You get a brief rest, maybe 15 minutes, eat a chunk of stale bread and drink some water. Then it's time for afternoon mucking, because those morning stalls you cleaned, they're already filling up again. The horses never stop producing waste, and you never stop cleaning it. It's the circle of life, except instead of being inspiring, it's just exhausting and smells terrible. You sit against the stable wall, gnawing on bread that's hard enough to chip a tooth, watching the senior grooms care for their tools, cleaning brushes, oiling leather, sharpening hoof picks. You have no tools to maintain because your tools are disposable. Like you. When your curry comb breaks completely, you'll get another cheap one. When you break completely, they'll get another stable boy. The afternoon sun is streaming through the windows now, illuminating the dust particles floating in the air. In this light, you can see just how filthy you are. Your hands are black with embedded grime. Your tunic is covered in horsehair and darker stains. Your face probably looks like you've been coal mining. And the day is nowhere near done. There's still afternoon feeding, more mucking, evening water rounds, and a dozen other tasks before you're allowed to collapse onto your pile of hay and sleep for maybe 5 hours before starting over. You finish your bread, drain your water, and stand up on protesting legs. The horses are watching you from their stalls, some curious, some indifferent, some actively hostile. They're clean now, gleaming in the afternoon light, and you're filthy from cleaning them. It's a perfect metaphor for medieval life. Those at the bottom serve those above, and the only reward is getting to do it again tomorrow. The tack room is a sacred space in the medieval stable, not sacred in a religious sense, though you've heard stable hands pray before entering it, but sacred in the way that expensive, irreplaceable items make everything around them holy through sheer monetary value. You're standing at the threshold now, late afternoon sun slanting through the narrow window, and Hugh is giving you the talk that every new stable boy receives exactly once. And you'd better remember every word because there won't be a second explanation. This, Hugh says, gesturing to the rows of saddles perched on wooden stands, represents more wealth than your village has seen in a generation. Sir Geoffrey's tournament saddle alone cost 40 marks. Do you know what 40 marks is? Boy, you shake your head because honestly, numbers that large are abstract concepts to someone who's never held more than a few pennies. It's enough to buy 8 warhorses, or your entire family 20 times over. He lets that sink in. So when I tell you to rub tallow into leather for 3 hours until your hands bleed, you understand that your hands bleeding is the cheaper option. The tack room smells different from the rest of the stableless manure. More leather and oil and metal. It's cramped, with barely enough room for 2 people to work, and every available surface is covered with equipment. Saddles of various types line one wall. The high-backed war saddles with their reinforced trees and steel rivets, the lighter riding saddles for palfreys, the simple pack saddles that are basically glorified wooden frames. Bridles hang from pegs, their bits cleaned but showing the wear of constant use. Reins, girths, stirrup leathers, cruppers, martingale vocabulary of equipment you're still learning. All of it crucial, all of it expensive, all of it your responsibility to maintain. Hugh hands you a clay pot of tallow-rendered animal fat, mostly mutton, with a consistency somewhere between wax and paste and a smell that's rancid even by stable standards. Start with the pack saddles. He instructs, pointing to the simplest equipment. Work the tallow into every inch of leather. The leather should darken slightly and feel supple, not stiff. Miss a spot, the leather cracks, the saddle fails, horse gets injured, you get beaten and then thrown out. Clear? Crystal clear. You're about to spend the next several hours rubbing rancid fat into leather with your bare hands, and the stakes are your continued employment and physical safety. You grab the first pack, sadly a simple affair of leather stretched over a wooden frame, and scoop out a handful of tallow. It's greasy and cold and feels absolutely disgusting between your fingers. You start working it into the leather using circular motions, and immediately understand why Hugh mentioned bleeding hands. The leather is stiff from use and weather, resistant to the tallow, and working the fat into the material requires constant, firm pressure that makes your already raw hands scream in protest. The process is meditative in the worst way. There's no variation, no excitement, Just endless circular rubbing while your hands gradually go from raw to numb to painful to some state beyond pain where they're just distant objects attached to your arms. You work the tallow into the seat, the panels, the girth straps, under the flaps, along every seam and edge. The leather slowly darkens and softens, which would be satisfying if you weren't simultaneously losing skin from your palms. Here's a fun medieval fact that makes this task even more special. Tallow isn't just for waterproofing and conditioning. It's also believed to have protective properties against evil spirits and bad luck. There are stable masters who insist on using tallow rendered from black sheep specifically, or tallow blessed by a priest, or tallow mixed with herbs gathered during specific moon phases. Hugh seems to be a practical type who just uses whatever tallow is available. But you've heard stories from other stable boys about masters who perform elaborate rituals while treating leather. Whether it helps the equipment last longer or just makes everyone feel better about their superstitions, you're not sure. One pack saddle takes about 45 minutes to treat properly. You examine every inch, feel for dry spots, work in extra tallow where the leather seems particularly stiff or cracked. There are 6 pack saddles total, which means you're looking at over 4 hours of work just for the basic equipment. Your hands are already showing new cracks in the skin where the tallow seeps in and stings. You try not to think about the fact that you still have to do the riding saddles after this, and then the war saddles, and then all the bridles and reins and supplementary equipment. The second pack saddle reveals a problem. There's a crack developing along one of the girth straps where it attaches to the tree. It's small, barely visible, but you can feel it under your fingers as you work in the tallow. This is exactly the kind of thing Hugh warned about. You call him over, point out the crack, and watch his face darken. How long has this been cracked? He demands. You have no idea. V never maintained this saddle before, but Hugh isn't interested in your ignorance. He examines it closely, presses on the leather around the crack, and grunts. Needs stitching before it spreads. Can you sew leather? Can you sew leather? You can barely sew cloth. But saying no isn't an option. So you nod and Hugh produces a leather needle thick as a nail, with a triangular point and a length of waxed sinew thread. Saddle stitch, he says, demonstrating once by pushing the needle through the leather on either side of the crack, pulling it tight, then repeating on the opposite side to create an X pattern. Every stitch crosses the last. Pull tight enough to close the crack, but not so tight you tear the leather. Go. You take the needle and immediately understand why leather workers are considered skilled craftsmen. The leather is thick, resistant, and pushing the needle through requires force that your exhausted hands can barely provide. You have to use a small wooden block as a thimble, pressing it against the back of the needle to drive it through. The first stitch takes 5 minutes and looks terrible, uneven, loose, nothing like Hugh's demonstration. He doesn't comment, just watches as you struggle through the second stitch, the third, the fourth. By the 10th stitch, you've developed something resembling technique. By the 20th, your fingers are bleeding from the needle slipping and puncturing skin instead of leather. The repair takes an hour, and when you're done, the crack is closed, but the stitching looks like it was done by a drunken spider. Hugh examines it, tugs on the girth strap to test the strength, and nods curtly. It'll hold. Keep going. No praise for completing a task you'd never done before. No acknowledgement of the blood now mixing with the tallow on your hands. Just keep going. Always keep going. The pack saddles eventually yield to the riding saddles, which are more complex and made of finer leather. These require more delicate treatment. The tallow must be worked in carefully, so as not to darken the leather too much or leave greasy spots. These saddles have tooling and decoration, patterns stamped into the leather that need to be followed as you work, ensuring the tallow penetrates the material without obscuring the designs. Lady Ashford's side saddle is particularly elaborate, with floral patterns carved into the leather and small silver decorations set into the cantle. You work around these embellishments with a small cloth, buffing the tallow to a subtle sheen that enhances rather than obscures. Historians still argue whether medieval leather care was effective or if equipment failed regularly despite maintenance. Some research suggests that well-maintained medieval tack could last decades, with saddles being passed down through generations. Other evidence points to frequent failures, especially in military contexts where equipment was stressed beyond normal limits. The truth probably depends on the quality of both the original material and the maintenance, but sitting here working tallow into your 15th piece of equipment, you're definitely trying to aim for the last decade's category because replacing any of this would result in consequences you'd rather not experience. The war saddles are the final challenge, and these are where your inexperience becomes genuinely dangerous. War saddles are complex pieces of engineering high cantles for back support during combat, reinforced pommels that can withstand lance impacts, multiple layers of leather over wooden trees, steel plates riveted in for protection. Every component needs treatment, but applying tallow near the steel requires care because excess grease can cause the metal to corrode or the rivets to loosen. Hugh supervises this part directly, guiding your hands, correcting your technique, occasionally just taking over when you're clearly about to ruin something worth more than your life. Sir Geoffrey's tournament saddle, the 40-mark monstrosities, the crown jewel of the tack room. It's a work of art, really, with its perfectly shaped tree, its precisely tooled leather, its steel reinforcements that are actually decorative as well as functional. Hugh doesn't let you touch this one with tallow. Instead, he treats it himself while you watch and learn. His hands move with practiced efficiency, working the fat into the leather in smooth, even strokes, buffing and polishing until the saddle gleams. This is craftsmanship, the kind that comes from decades of experience. And watching it, you understand that there's actual skill involved in tack maintenance. Not just mindless rubbing. But you don't have decades of experience. You have raw hands, exhausted arms, and about 30 more pieces of equipment to treat before nightfall. The bridles come next. Each one needs its leather components treated. But you have to remove the bits first because tallow and metal don't mix. The bits themselves need cleaning, which means scrubbing off the accumulated horse saliva, grain residue, and rust using sand and water. This is actually satisfying work. The metal brightens under your scrubbing, transforming from dull and crusty to shining. You use a mixture of sand and vinegar for the worst spots, watching the chemical reaction eat away the rust. Then rinse and dry thoroughly to prevent new rust from forming. The reins are long strips of leather that need to be treated their entire length. You work the tallow in sections, hanging each rein from a peg and working your way down, ensuring even coverage. Your technique has improved over the horsery faster now, more efficient, though your hands have deteriorated to the point where you're not entirely sure they'll ever recover. The leather of the reins is thinner than saddle leather, more supple, and it absorbs the tallow quickly. You can actually see the transformation as you work. The dry brown leather darkening to a rich, oiled shade. Stirrup leathers, girth straps, cruppers, breast collars. Supplementary equipment seems endless. Each piece has its own requirements. Girth straps need extra tallow because they bear the most friction. Cruppers need careful treatment around the dock piece that goes under the horse's tail. Breast collars have buckles and rivets that need to be worked around. You develop a rhythm. Scoop and rub, scoop and rub. Your mind going blank from the repetition while your body mechanically continues the work. There's a quirky historical detail about medieval tack maintenance that you learn from one of the other stable boys during a brief break. Some stable masters insist that leather must be treated during the waning moon, claiming that leather drinks better when the moon is shrinking. Others say it should be done during rain because the moisture in the air helps the tallow penetrate. Still others have elaborate prayers or rituals involving specific saints. Saint Eligius, patron of farriers and horses, is popular. Hugh seems immune to such superstitions, focused entirely on the practical application of fat to leather, but you've noticed he always crosses himself before starting on the war saddles, so maybe even practical men hedge their bets. The evening light is fading by the time you finish the last paise, a simple halter that barely needed treatment but couldn't be skipped. Your hands are beyond pain, existing in some state where they're just tools attached to your arms, objects that perform functions without bothering to send sensation reports to your brain. The tallow pot is nearly empty, your tunic is stained with grease, and the tack room smells like a candle factory run by someone with questionable hygiene standards. Hugh inspects your work, moving through the room with his critical eye, testing each piece for suppleness, checking for missed spots, ensuring everything meets his standards. He finds 3 bridles that need additional treatment. You miss spots near the buckles where the leather folds and makes you redo them while he watches. This takes another 30 minutes, but finally, he nods. Acceptable, he says, which from Hugh is practically a medal of honor. You're dismissed from the tack room, but the day isn't over. Not even close. The horses need evening water. The stalls need final inspection. And there's always something else. You stumble out into the main stable, hands held slightly away from your body because touching anything hurts, and see the other stable boys moving through their tasks with the same exhausted determination. Everyone is at their limit, and everyone keeps going because stopping isn't an option. The groomed horses from this morning are already showing signs of needing another grooming. There's dust in their coats. Their manes are tangled. One of them has apparently rolled and is covered in straw. The freshly cleaned stalls from dawn have accumulated new layers of manure. The carefully oiled tack will be used tomorrow. We'll get sweaty and dirty. We'll need treatment again next week. Everything you've done today will need to be done again, and again, and again, in an endless cycle of maintenance that never actually maintains anything permanently. You look at your hands, bloody, cracked, stained dark with tallow that won't wash out for days, and realize this is what your hands will look like for the next 7 years. This is your life now, measured in saddles oiled and stalls mucked and horses groomed, with no end in sight except the distant promise of freedom that might as well be on the moon for how achievable it feels. But there's no time for existential despair. Hugh is already calling for evening water rounds, and those buckets won't carry themselves. You flex your ruined hands, wince at the pain that comes flooding back now that you've stopped working, and head for the well, because that's what you do. You keep going. The rouncy named Copper is lying down in his stall, and this is wrong. Horses don't lie down much, they sleep standing up, lock their legs and doze, maybe lie down for an hour or 2 at night if they feel safe. But Copper is flat on his side at mid-morning, breathing heavily, and there's sweat darkening his coat despite the cold. You notice this while doing your routine stall check, and your stomach immediately drops because you know what comes next. You're about to become a medieval veterinarian, which is terrifying because medieval veterinary medicine is approximately 10% knowledge, 30% superstition, and 60% desperate improvisation. You run for Hugh, who takes one look at Copper and curses in a way that would make a priest faint. Colic, he says flatly, which is the diagnosis you were dreading. Colic in horses is a digestive issue that ranges from mildly uncomfortable to dead within hours, and you can't tell which category you're dealing with until it's usually too late. In the modern world, you'd call a vet with actual medical training and equipment. In medieval times, you've got Hugh's experience, a collection of folk remedies that may or may not work, and prayer. Lots of prayer. Get him up, Hugh orders, and you enter the stall to try convincing a sick, 200-pound animal to stand when he clearly doesn't want to. You pull on his halter, click your tongue, slap his shoulder gently at first, then harder when he doesn't respond. Copper rolls his eyes at you, groans, and makes no effort to rise. Hugh joins you, and together you haul on the halter while making encouraging noises that probably just annoy the horse. Finally, with obvious effort and discomfort, Copper staggers to his feet. This is good. Horses lying down too long can damage their internal organs from their own weight, but he immediately tries to lie back down, which Hugh prevents by keeping tension on the lead rope. Walk him, Hugh commands, handing you the rope. Constant circles in the yard. Don't let him stop. Don't let him roll. Don't let him lie down. If he drops, you come get me immediately. And just like that, you're in charge of keeping a colicky horse alive through movement and willpower. You lead Copper out of the stable into the stable yard, a muddy open area between buildings, and begin walking him in slow circles. He resists every step, tries to stop, attempts to paw at his belly, wants desperately to roll, which would be fatal if his intestines are twisted, as the rolling would complete the torsion and kill him. Walking a sick horse sounds simple until you're actually doing it. Copper weighs more than 10 of you, and when he decides he doesn't want to move, you can pull on that lead rope with all your strength and accomplish exactly nothing. You have to use tricks, change direction suddenly to surprise him into stepping, make sharp noises to startle him forward, occasionally get behind him and slap his hindquarters to drive him on. And you have to do this continuously, without rest, because if he lies down and rolls, you've failed and the horse dies. The other stable boys watch as they pass, some with sympathy, some with relief that it's not their horse, their problem. Colic is common enough that everyone has dealt with it, and everyone knows the awful helplessness of watching a horse suffer while you walk endless circles and hope for the best. Hugh disappears into the stable and returns with supplies: a leather bucket, a clay bottle, and a grim expression that suggests he's preparing for a long battle. Keep walking, he says unnecessarily. You're already walking. You haven't stopped, and he heads to the kitchen building. You continue your circles, around and around the muddy yard, Copper groaning and trying to stop, you forcing him forward. Your arms are already tired from pulling on the rope, and you've only been at this for maybe 20 minutes. Horses can colic for hours, even days. You're looking at potentially endless walking until either Copper improves or dies, and there's no way to know which will happen first. Hugh returns with the bucket full of ale, actual ale, the kind that humans drink, which seems wasteful until you remember that a roundsea is worth significant money and ale is cheaper than a replacement horse. Hold him steady, Hugh orders, which is laughable because Copper is never steady, but you do your best. Hugh forces Copper's mouth open, not easy with an unwilling horse, and begins pouring ale down his throat. The theory, as Hugh explained once during a previous colic case, is that ale helps with digestive issues, relaxes the gut, and encourages everything to start moving properly again. Whether this is based on actual medical knowledge or just medieval people applying human hangover cures to horses, nobody knows for certain. Copper chokes, butters, and ale runs down his chin and soaks into his chest. But Hugh keeps pouring until the bucket is empty. 2 pints. Hugh mutters, like he's dosing medicine, which essentially he is. Keep walking. If he passes manure, call me immediately. If he doesn't pass manure within 2 hours, we try the pipe. You don't ask what the pipe is because you're pretty sure you don't want to know. And also because Copper is trying to lie down again and you need all your attention on keeping him upright. The walking continues, around and around the yard, through mud that's getting deeper from the traffic, past the muck heap that you're now intimately familiar with from multiple angles, circling back to where you started in an endless loop. Copper's breathing doesn't improve. His sides are still heaving, sweat still darkening his coat, and his eyes have a glazed look that suggests significant pain. You talk to him as you walk, not because it helps but because the silence is unbearable. Come on, Copper. Just pass some manure and we can stop this nightmare. Work with me here. Here's a historical fact that doesn't help your current situation. Medieval people had surprisingly detailed knowledge of horse colic. There are manuscripts describing different types: twisted gut, impacted gut, gas colicand, various treatments for each. The problem is that diagnosing which type you're dealing with requires either extensive experience or luck, and treatment effectiveness is maybe 50-50 on a good day. Historians still argue whether medieval horse medicine was advanced for its time or just elaborate guesswork dressed up as knowledge. But when you're walking a dying horse in circles while covered in mud and ale, the academic debate seems somewhat irrelevant. An hour passes. Your legs are numb from walking. Your arms are screaming from constant tension on the rope. And Copper has shown no improvement. No manure has been passed, which is bad news because it suggests a blockage rather than simple gas. Hugh appears again, this time carrying a long wooden pipe with a leather bag attached to one end, a primitive enema apparatus that you definitely didn't want to know about but now can't unknow. Hold his tail, Hugh instructs, and you understand that your day has somehow gotten worse. You hand him the lead rope, move to Kappa's back end, and lift his tail while Hugh positions the pipe. What follows is a procedure that would violate several modern medical ethics standards but is apparently standard practice in medieval stables. Hugh inserts the pipe. Copper is too sick to protest much and uses the leather bag to pump liquid into the horse's rectum. The liquid is a mixture of warm water, linseed oil, and what smells like soap, designed to lubricate and stimulate the bowels. The whole process is undignified for everyone involved. You're holding a horse's tail while your superior forces liquid into its rear end, standing in a muddy yard in the medieval equivalent of a medical emergency, and trying not to think too hard about any of it. Hugh pumps the bag several times, removes the pipe, and nods for you to release the tail. Walk him another hour, he says. This should work. If it doesn't, he doesn't finish the sentence. But you know what comes after if it doesn't: a dead horse, a loss of valuable property, and potentially someone getting blamed for inadequate care. You resume walking, and Copper seems even more uncomfortable now, which Hugh said would happen. The treatment causes cramping before it causes relief. The horse groans, tries to kick at his own belly, attempts to drop and roll. You prevent all of this through constant vigilance and increasingly desperate pulling on the lead rope. Your hands, already damaged from yesterday's tack maintenance, are being rubbed raw again by the rope. Blood is mixing with mud on your palms, and you've stopped noticing because pain is just your default state now. 30 minutes into the second hour, Copper suddenly stops, spreads his hind legs, and passes manure. A lot of manure. An impressive amount of manure, actually, given that he's supposedly been blocked. The smell is beyond description. Imagine the worst thing you've ever smelled. Then make it medieval, but you could weep with relief because this means the treatment worked. The blockage is clearing, and Copper will probably live. You let him finish and he continues for an impressive duration, then call for Hugh. Hugh examines the manure like a fortune teller reading tea leaves, which in a way he is. The consistency, color, and smell all tell him about Kappa's internal condition. Good, he finally pronounces. The impaction is moving. Walk him another 30 minutes, then offer water. No food until tomorrow. This is the medieval equivalent of a full recovery plan: more walking, eventual hydration, and a fasting period to let the gut rest. The final 30 minutes of walking are easier because Copper is clearly feeling better. His breathing has improved. The glazed look is leaving his eyes, and he's actually trying to grab mouthfuls of grass as you pass the edge of the yard. You prevent this. Hugh said no food, but it's a good sign that his appetite is returning. By the time you stop, you've been walking for nearly 3 hours. Your legs feel like jelly, and you're covered in mud and various other substances you'd rather not identify. You offer Copper water, just half a bucket to start, as per Hugh's instructions, and he drinks eagerly. Not too much, not too fast, but enough to suggest he's on the mend. You return him to his stall, which needs mucking again after his digestive explosion. But that's a problem for future you. Current you just needs to stand still for a moment and process the fact that you've successfully treated a colicky horse using medieval medicine and sheer determination. But there's no rest because another stable boy is calling for help. One of the pack horses has a swelling on its leg that appeared overnight. You drag yourself over to investigate, and sure enough, there's a hot, puffy area on the horse's hind leg around the fetlock. This could be anything: an infection, an abscess, a strain, a bite from another horse. Your job is to figure out which and treat it, armed with the extensive medical knowledge of whatever Hugh taught you and things that seemed to work before. The quirky medieval treatment for swelling is actually somewhat logical: cold water and pressure. You fetch a bucket of cold well water and several strips of linen. Then begin the process of cold water bandaging. You soak the linen in cold water, wrap it around the swollen area, and secure it. Every 20 minutes, you unwrap, re-soak in fresh cold water, and rewrap. This continues for 2 hours, during which you're essentially stuck beside this horse, changing bandages, fetching fresh water, and hoping the swelling goes down. It actually does help. The cold reduces inflammation, the pressure prevents fluid accumulation, and by the end, the swelling has noticeably decreased. But you also apply a poultice mixture of bran, vinegar, and ground herbs that Hugh prepares because medieval medicine believes in redundancy. The poultice is applied warm, wrapped in place with dry linen, and left overnight. Will it help? Who knows? Will it hurt? Probably not. Is there any scientific basis for this treatment? That's a question for historians who still argue whether medieval horse medicine was effective or just theater that occasionally coincided with natural healing. The day continues with various minor medical issues. A horse with a cough gets a mixture of honey and herbs in his feed. A mare with crusty eyes gets them bathed with chamomile tea. A gelding with cracked hooves gets them packed with a mixture of tallow and ground pine tar. You're not a veterinarian. You're barely trained. But you're the closest thing these horses have to medical care. So you mix your potions and apply your treatments and pray that you're helping rather than making things worse. There's also the leech treatment, which is exactly as horrible as it sounds. One of the palfreys has inflammation in his leg, not swelling, but heat and sensitivity that suggests blood congestion. The medieval solution is bloodletting via leeches, which you have to collect from the pond, apply to the affected area, and then monitor while they feed. The leeches are kept in a clay jar filled with pond water, fat and glossy and actively disturbing. You select several large ones. Bigger leeches mean more blood removal, and apply them to the horse's leg. Watching leeches feed is like watching nature's slowest horror movie. They attach, their bodies start to swell with blood, and you just have to wait until they're full and drop off naturally. Removing them early can cause the wound to bleed excessively, so patience is required. You sit beside the palfrey for an hour while 3 leeches slowly engorge themselves, and try not to think too hard about the fact that you're essentially using parasites as medical devices. When the leeches finally drop off, bloated and satisfied, you collect them back into the jar. They can be reused, apparently, because medieval medicine is thrifty like that, and bandage the small wounds they've left. The palfrey's leg does seem less hot afterward, though whether that's from the bloodletting or just time passing is impossible to determine. Hugh inspects your work, nods approval, and moves on to the next crisis. By evening, you've treated colic, swelling, coughs, eye infections, hoof problems, inflammation, and administered more dubious folk remedies than you can count. Your hands smell like herbs, vinegar, tallow, and leech water. You're exhausted from the constant vigilance required to monitor sick animals, and you're deeply aware that any of these horses could take a turn for the worse overnight. And if they die, someone will be blamed, and that someone is probably you. You check on Copper one last time before the day ends. He's eating hay. Hugh finally allowed food and seems completely recovered. The near-death experience of this morning might as well have never happened. This is the frustrating reality of medieval horse medicine. Sometimes the treatments work spectacularly, sometimes horses die despite your best efforts, and you never quite know which outcome you'll get until it's over. As you collapse onto your pile of hay for the night, body aching and hands stinging, you realize that being a stable hand isn't just about mucking stalls and grooming horses. You're also an untrained veterinary technician, expected to diagnose and treat medical emergencies with inadequate knowledge and primitive tools, gambling with valuable property while having absolutely no safety net if you fail. Sweet dreams. You wake up before the morning bell today not by choice, but because a rat has decided that your hair makes excellent nesting material and is actively trying to relocate strands of it to some hidden corner of the stable. You swat at the rat, miss, and it scurries away with what you're pretty sure is actual chunks of your hair in its mouth. This is your life now. Even the rats treat you like you're just another resource to be exploited. Welcome to the social hierarchy of a medieval stable, where you're going to discover that being at the bottom isn't just about hard work, it's about systematic humiliation, casual violence, and the dawning realization that dogs literally have more rights and respect than you do. The stable's pecking order is brutal and explicit, and it's enforced every moment of every day through 1,000 tiny degradations. At the very top, though rarely seen in the actual stable, is the Lord's Marshal, the man who oversees all horses, hounds, and hawks. He's nobility adjacent, wears fine clothes, eats at the Lord's table, and probably doesn't even know your name. Below him is the Master of Horse, who manages daily operations but focuses on the valuable animals. Then comes Hugh, your stable master, who runs the actual stable with an iron fist and missing fingers. Below Hugh are the senior grooms, the regular grooms, and then so far below that you're practically in a different social universe, the stable boys. But here's what the organizational chart doesn't tell you. There's an entire parallel hierarchy that matters just as much. And in this version, you're below the dogs. Literally. The Lord's hunting hounds have their own kennel attached to the stable, managed by huntsmen who are considered skilled professionals. These dogs eat meat, actual meat, not scrap sleep on clean straw that's changed daily. And when one gets sick, a specialized dog physician is sometimes summoned. You eat porridge and hope it's not moldy, sleep on straw that's changed when someone remembers, and when you get sick, you work through it or get replaced. The dogs have names that everyone knows and uses. Your boy or you there, or occasionally the tall one, to distinguish you from the short one, who works the opposite shift. The morning begins with a perfect demonstration of your status. You're carrying whatever task you'll return to in detail because it deserves its own circle of hell when you encounter one of the Lord's huntsmen leading 3 hounds through the stable yard. The proper protocol, which you've learned through painful experience, is to stop, move to the side, lower your eyes, and wait for them to pass. You do this, pressing yourself against the stable wall with your heavy buckets, while the huntsman, a man named Richard, who you've never actually spoken, tokes past without acknowledging your existence. The dogs, however, investigate you thoroughly, sniffing at your legs, and one of them lifts his leg and urinates on your foot. Richard sees this, makes eye contact with you, and laughs, then continues walking without comment or apology because why would he? The dog has more value than you do. If you had kicked the dog away, a natural response to being urinated on, you'd be beaten for threatening valuable hunting stock. So you stand there, fresh dog urine soaking through your already disgusting rag shoes, and wait until they're gone before continuing with your water buckets. This is fine. This is normal. This is your life. The stable boys there are 5 of you, currently have your own micro-hierarchy based on time served, size, and favoritism from Hugh. you're somewhere in the middle. Not the newest, not the oldest, not the strongest, not the weakest. The newest boy is maybe 10 years old, small enough that he can barely lift a full water bucket, and he gets the worst jobs because everyone above him can push work down. There's a brutal efficiency to its suffering flows downhill until it reaches someone who can't push it any further. You participate in this system even though you hate it, because not participating means taking on more suffering yourself, and you're already at capacity. The oldest stable boy is a 16-year-old named Tom who's nearing the end of his service term. He's developed the dead-eyed look of someone who's survived through pure stubbornness, and he takes every opportunity to minimize his own work by delegating to younger boys. "You, take over this mucking," he'll say, and you do it because he's senior and that's how this works. "Go fetch Hugh. Tell him I need help." And you run off to deliver messages because running errands for Tom is preferable to having Tom make your life actively worse. It's not personal. Tom treats everyone below him like this because everyone above him treats him the same way. It's hierarchy all the way down, like turtles, except the turtles are standing in manure and everyone's miserable. Meal times reveal the hierarchy with painful clarity. The stable has a long wooden table where everyone eats breakfast well. Not everyone. The senior grooms eat first, taking the best portions of whatever's been provided. Today it's porridge and bread, and the senior grooms get porridge that's actually thick and bread that's relatively fresh. Then the regular grooms eat, getting thinner porridge and harder bread. Then the stable boys approach the table, and by this point, you're getting porridge that's mostly water with some oat sediment, and bread that's been stale for days. The newest boy gets whatever's left, which is sometimes nothing, and he has to wait until dinner to eat. You're not allowed to eat until everyone above you has finished. You're not allowed to sit while eating unless all the stools are free, which they never are. You stand at the end of the table, spooning watery porridge into your mouth as fast as possible before someone decides they need you for a task. And you chew the stale bread while walking to your next job because stopping to eat properly is a luxury you can't afford. The hunting dogs, meanwhile, are fed in their kennel on a schedule, given time to eat in peace, and no one disturbs them during meals. You watch this happen through the kennel window and try not to think about the implications. The casual violence of stable life is constant and unremarkable. Hugh hits you not often, not severely by medieval standards, but regularly enough that you're always slightly tense in his presence, waiting for the blow that might come if you move wrong or speak inappropriately or just happen to be nearby when he's frustrated. The senior grooms shove you aside when you're in their way, occasionally cuff you on the head when you're too slow, once threw a hoof pick at you when you brought the wrong brush. Tom, the senior stable boy, trips you sometimes for entertainment, pushes you into stalls when you're not ready, accidentally spills water you've just carried so you have to fetch more. But here's the twisted part. You can't complain. There's no authority to appeal to because the hierarchy itself is the authority. If you went to Hugh to complain about a senior groom hitting you, Hugh would hit you for wasting his time and probably hit you again for suggesting that the groom was wrong. The system is designed to be self-enforcing, with punishment flowing downward until it dissipates against those who have no one below them to punish in turn. You're near that bottom level, and the only thing that keeps you from being at the absolute bottom is the existence of younger, smaller boys who you can push around when necessary. There's a quirky historical detail about medieval servant hierarchies that makes this all even more depressing. It was actually formalized and written down. There are household management manuals from the period that explicitly describe the ranking of servants, the appropriate ways to discipline them, and the expected deference patterns. Being beaten by your superior wasn't abuse. It was management. Having your meals determined by rank wasn't unfair. It was proper order. Even the language reflects theory, not a person who works in the stable. You're a stable boy, defined entirely by your function and your subordinate status. The clothing hierarchy is visible and enforced. Hugh wears a wool tunic that's been dyed actual dye, not just natural wool color, and he has leather boots that are whole, not wrapped rags. The senior grooms wear undyed wool tunics that are at least cleanish and have some kind of foot covering that qualifies as shoes. You wear a tunic that might have been any color originally, but is now just dirt brown from the embedded filth. And your feet are wrapped in rags that were probably fabric once, but have achieved some transitional state between cloth and organic compost. When the Lord visits, the stablia rare occurrenciery required to hide, to literally remove yourself from sight because your appearance is too degrading to be seen by nobility. Sleeping arrangements follow the same pattern. Hugh has a small room attached to the stable, with an actual bed, just a wooden frame with straw mattress, but it's elevated off the ground and has a blanket. The senior grooms sleep in the loft, where it's warmer and drier. The regular grooms sleep in a corner of the stable that's been partitioned off with wooden boards. And you sleep in the stable proper, in a pile of hay in the corner of the packhorse section, sharing space with mice, rats, and whatever insects are active in this season. You're literally bedding down with the animals, and not even the valuable animals, the cheap ones, the expendable ones, the ones like you. There are also the sexual politics of the stable, which you're just beginning to understand in a vague, uncomfortable way. Some of the older stable boys are involved with kitchen maids or laundry women relationships that are technically forbidden but tacitly accepted as long as they don't interfere with work. But there's also predation, harassment, and exploitation that happens in the shadows of the medieval hierarchy. A senior groom who corners a younger boy, a stable master who demands certain favors, a culture where saying no to someone above you simply isn't an option. You've been lucky so far, young enough or unremarkable enough to avoid this attention, but you've seen other boys disappear into tack rooms with senior staff and emerge looking diminished somehow. And nobody talks about it because talking about it would require acknowledging that those at the bottom have rights worth protecting. Historians still argue whether medieval working conditions were as brutal as they appear in records, or if modern perspectives make them seem worse than they were. Some scholars point to evidence of genuine care between masters and servants, of long-term relationships built on mutual respect, of servants who were considered part of extended household families. Other evidence suggests widespread abuse, exploitation, and a system that viewed lower-class workers as barely human. You're living through it, and from your perspective, it's definitely the second option. Though you suppose if you survive long enough and rise high enough, you might develop some nostalgia for the way things were. The afternoon brings a visit from the castle steward, a man so far above your station that looking directly at him would be presumptuous. He's inspecting the horses with Hugh, discussing something about provisions and costs, and you're required to be nearby in case they need anything, but also invisible in every meaningful way. You stand against the wall, eyes down, trying to minimize your existence while remaining available. The steward walks past you multiple times, once brushing against you and never acknowledges you're there. You're furniture that can fetch things, a tool that happens to be made of meat. But the dogs get acknowledged. When the steward sees the hounds, he stops, asks the huntsmen their names, comments on their condition, even reaches down to pet one. The contrast is so stark it's almost funny. A valuable dog receives more human interaction and positive attention in 30 seconds than you've received in weeks. The dog is spoken to kindly, touched gently, treated like it has worth. You're an object that's occasionally kicked into motion. Evening brings the final humiliation of the day. The senior grooms are going to the village tavern. There's some kind of celebration. Someone's birthday or a saint's day. You're not sure, and they're taking the regular grooms with them. Even Tom, the senior stable boy, is being allowed to go because he's nearly finished his term and they're feeling generous. But you and the younger boys are staying behind to watch the stable overnight. Not because it needs watching particularly, the horses are fine. nothing's happening, but because including you in social activities would suggest you're people worth socializing with, and that's clearly not the case. You watch them leave, laughing and talking, heading toward an evening of ale and whatever passes for entertainment in a medieval village. And you settle into your pile of hay, surrounded by the gentle breathing of sleeping horses and the scratching of rats. And you think about the hunting dogs in their clean kennel with their meat meals and their specialized care. And you wonder at what point in history someone decided that a good dog was worth more than a poor boy. The answer, you suspect, is that it's always been this way. The hierarchy isn't a bug in the system, it's the system itself, working exactly as designed. And you're exactly where you're meant to be, at the bottom, sleeping in hay, smelling like manure, being urinated on by dogs, and expected to be grateful for the opportunity. Tomorrow, it all starts again. Same hierarchy, same degradations, same casual cruelties. The only thing that changes is you get slightly more broken, slightly more resigned, slightly more like Tom with his dead eyes and mechanical movements. This is the real education of a stable boy. Learning your place, accepting your worthlessness, and surviving long enough to maybe, possibly, inflict the same system on someone below you someday. Sweet dreams, if you can manage them in the hay while the rats steal your hair. You wake up to find that the youngest stable boy, the 10-year-old whose name you've never learned because he'll probably be dead or gone before it matters, is burning with fever and covered in pustules. This is bad. This is potentially catastrophic. Because in a medieval stable where everyone shares the same cramped quarters, breathes the same ammonia-thick air, and lives in conditions that would make a modern health inspector weep blood, disease doesn't politely limit itself to one victim. Disease spreads like fire through dry straw, and you're all very, very flammable. Hugh takes one look at the boy and makes a decision that tells you everything about medieval medical priorities. Isolate him in the far storage shed. Give him water, nothing else. If he's alive in 3 days, we'll know it's not plague. The boy is dragged, literally dragged, because he can barely walk to a tiny shed that's normally used for storing old equipment. He's left there with a single blanket and a bucket of water, and the door is barred from the outside. This is medieval quarantine, abandonment with the thin veneer of precaution. If he recovers, great. If he dies, at least he does it away from the valuable horses. But the damage is already done in terms of exposure. The boy slept in the stable, breathed the same air, touched the same tools, drank from the same water dipper as everyone else. You're all potentially infected with whatever he has, and there's nothing to do but wait and see who shows symptoms next. In the meantime, life continues because horses don't care about epidemics, and neither do the lords who own them. The fear of disease in a medieval stable is constant and rational. You're living in conditions that are perfect for spreading illness. Cramped quarters, poor ventilation, no understanding of germ theory, minimal hygiene, compromised immune systems from malnutrition and exhaustion, and close contact with animals who carry their own diseases. Glanders is the big oni bacterial infection that horses get and can pass to humans, causing fever, pustules, and death in a significant percentage of cases. There's also anthrax from handling infected hides, various respiratory infections from the constant ammonia and dust, parasitic infections from the filth, and a rotating cast of medieval plagues that sweep through populations seemingly at random. You develop a cough by midday. It might be nothing everyone coughs in the stable from the ammonia and dust, but it might also be the first symptom of whatever the youngest boy has. You try to suppress it, because showing weakness in a medieval workplace is dangerous. If Hugh decides you're sick, you'll join the boy in the isolation shed, and isolation might as well be a death sentence when you're already malnourished and exhausted. So you cough into your sleeve, pretend it's nothing, and hope your body fights off whatever's trying to kill you. The horses are also getting sick. which is somehow both better and worse than human illness. Better because sick horses get actual treatment theory valuable property worth saving. Worse because treating sick horses becomes your job, adding to your already impossible workload. 3 of the palfreys are showing signs of Stranglesia bacterial infection that causes swelling in the throat and lymph nodes, fever, and nasal discharge. It's highly contagious among horses, and it's spreading through the stable despite your best efforts at, well, you're not actually doing anything to prevent spread because the concept of disease transmission isn't understood yet. You're just watching it happen and treating symptoms as they appear. The treatment for strangles is medieval barbarism dressed up as medicine. Hugh lances the abscesses that form in the horses' throats, cutting into swollen lymph nodes to drain the puissant you're required to hold the horses still during this procedure. Imagine trying to keep a 200-pound animal calm while someone cuts into its neck with a knife that's been sterilized by wiping it on a relatively clean cloth. The horse screams, thrashes, tries to rear, and you're hanging onto its halter with all your strength, getting covered in pus and blood while Hugh works. After lancing, the wounds are packed with a mixture of herbs, honey, and spider webs. Yes, spider webs, which are actually not the worst choice since they have some antimicrobial properties, though medieval people use them because they bind the wound and draw out evil humors, not because they understand chemistry. You're sent to collect spider webs from the darkest corners of the stable, carefully gathering the sticky strands while trying not to think about the spiders who made them and who are definitely still nearby, watching you steal their homes. The infected horses are isolated in separate stalls, which helps somewhat, but you're still moving between sick and healthy horses constantly, carrying the bacteria on your hands, your clothes, your tools. Cross-contamination is inevitable when you don't know contamination is a thing to avoid. You wash your hands occasionally in a bucket of water, but that water is used by everyone for everything, so you're probably just redistributing germs more efficiently. One of the pack horses, Daisy, who's always been gentle, develops a cough and labored breathing. This could be several things: an upper respiratory infection, pneumonia, or the beginning stages of glanders. There's no way to diagnose accurately, so Hugh treats for the most common option and hopes for the best. Daisy gets steam treatments. You boil water with herbs in a bucket, place the bucket in her stall, and drape a cloth over her head to trap the steam. The theory is that breathing medicated steam will help clear the lungs and soothe the throat. The reality is that you're creating a sauna for a sick horse and hoping that counts as medicine. You sit with Daisy during these treatments, holding the cloth in place while she breathes steam, and you can hear the congestion in her lungs, a wet, rattling sound that suggests fluid accumulation. In a modern setting, she'd get antibiotics and supportive care. Here, she gets herb steam and prayer. You pray too, not because you're particularly religious, but because when you're holding a cloth over a dying horse's head at midnight, prayer is the only thing left that doesn't require tools or knowledge. Daisy dies on the 3rd day. You find her in the morning, already cold, lying in her stall with foam dried around her muzzle. It's the first horse death you've witnessed directly, and it's worse than you imagined. Not because you were particularly attached to Daisy, you can't afford emotional attachment in this job, but because you failed. You treated her, sat with her, tried everything Hugh told you to do, and she died anyway, and now her body needs to be removed, which becomes your problem. Moving a dead horse is exactly as difficult as it sounds. Daisy weighs maybe 900 pounds dead weight literally, and she needs to be dragged out of the stable and taken to the knacker's yard where her body will be rendered for whatever useful products can be extracted. You harness 2 of the cart horses to chains that are wrapped around Daisy's body, and you drive them forward, dragging her corpse across the stable floor, through the door, across the yard, leaving a disturbing trail in the mud. The knacker meets you at his yard, a man who smells like death because he processes death for a living, and he takes over from there. You don't ask what happens to Daisy's body. You don't want to know. The quirky historical detail about dead horses in medieval times is that nothing was wasted. Hides became leather, bones became glue or tools, hooves became various products, meat went to dogs or desperate people, and even the blood had uses in various industries. Daisy will be completely disassembled and redistributed into the medieval economy, continuing to serve the social hierarchy even in death. It's efficient and ecological and absolutely grim when you're the one who just dragged her corpse through the mud. Back at the stable, you have to clean and disinfect Daisy's stall, which in medieval terms means mucking it thoroughly, burning herbs in it to purify the air, and maybe splashing some vinegar around because vinegar is believed to ward off disease. Whether any of this actually prevents the next horse from getting sick is questionable, but it's what's done, so you do it. The stall smells like smoke, vinegar, and death, an improvement over just death, you suppose. The youngest stable boy dies on the 4th day. You hear about it secondhand. Someone opens the isolation shed in the morning and finds him cold. No ceremony, no mourning, just a body that needs disposal and a suddenly open position in the stable's workforce. Hugh mentions it in passing while assigning morning tasks. The young one's dead. Tom, you're in charge of finding a replacement. There's usually boys at the village market looking for work. A child died alone in a shed, and the primary concern is filling the labor gap he left behind. You never learn what disease killed him. Could have been smallpox, could have been some other pox, could have been plague, could have been any of the dozen diseases that killed medieval children with depressing regularity. His body goes to the parish for burial, probably a mass grave since he's poor and alone, and that's the end of his story. He existed, he worked, he died, and the stable continues functioning without missing a step. Your cough gets worse. You're definitely sick with something now, fever, body aches, the cough that brings up things you'd rather not examine. But you keep working because stopping means isolation or dismissal, and both options are unacceptable. You muck stalls while fighting waves of dizziness, groom horses while your hands shake with fever, carry water while your muscles scream protest. Other stable hands are also showing symptoms. Severion's coughing. Someone has a fever. Tom is moving slower than usual and looks pale. The stable is becoming a sick ward where the patients are required to continue manual labor while they're ill. Medieval medical understanding of contagion is limited and weird. There's some recognition that disease spreads from person to person, hence the isolation of the youngest boy, but the mechanism is thought to be bad air or evil humors, rather than actual pathogens. You're told to avoid breathing on the horses, to wash in vinegar water, to carry herbs in your pockets to ward off sickness. None of this is effective, but it creates the illusion of control in a situation where control doesn't exist. The treatment for your illness is more of the medieval greatest hits. Steam inhalation with herbs, a tea made from willow bark that actually does help with fever because it contains salicylic acid, the precursor to aspirin, though nobody knows that yet, and the recommendation to sweat it out, which just means continue physical labor until you either recover or collapse. You're also given a preventative measure, a clove of garlic to chew on throughout the day. The garlic is supposed to purify your blood and ward off disease. What it actually does is make you reek of garlic on top of all the other smells, but you chew it dutifully because refusing treatment suggests you don't want to get better, and that's insubordination. Historians still argue whether medieval people understood more about disease than they're given credit for, or if they were simply working with completely incorrect frameworks that occasionally stumbled onto effective treatments by accident. The willow bark tea actually works. The garlic has some antimicrobial properties. The steam treatments can help with congestion, but these are mixed in with bloodletting, humoral theory, and astrological timing of treatments, so it's hard to tell what's wisdom and what's lucky guessing. The strangles outbreak among the horses continues spreading. 5 palfreys are now infected. 2 rounceys are showing symptoms, and there's concern about the destriers catching it. The destriers are isolated more carefully. Their stalls are in a separate section. Different grooms handle them, and any equipment used on sick horses is kept far away from them. This is the closest the medieval stable comes to actual quarantine procedures, and it's only enacted because the destriers are too valuable to risk. The cheaper horses are left to sicken and recover or die based on their own immune systems and whatever treatments you can provide between coughing fits. You lance another abscess on a palfrey, drain the pus, pack it with spider webs and honey, and the horse recovers over the next week. You lance an abscess on a rouncy, same procedure, and that horse develops a secondary infection and has to be destroyed because he's too sick to save and not valuable enough to justify extensive treatment. The difference between recovery and death sometimes comes down to sheer luck, sometimes to the inherent constitution of the animal, and sometimes you suspect how much the horse is worth and therefore how much effort goes into saving it. Your illness peaks and then gradually subsides. You don't die, which feels like winning even though all you've won is the right to continue working in a plague-ridden stable. Your cough lingers for weeks, and your body feels fundamentally weakened, like you've lost muscle mass and gained permanent exhaustion. But you're alive, and in medieval terms, that's success. The stable eventually stabilizes. The youngest boy is replaced by another desperate child from the village. The sick horses either recover or die and are replaced. The coughing among the workers gradually stops. Life returns to its normal rhythm of suffering, and the disease outbreak becomes just another thing that happened, barely worth mentioning in the daily grind. But you've learned something important. In a medieval stable, disease is just another part of the hierarchy. The valuable are protected, the expendable are exposed, and treatment is allocated based on worth rather than need. You're on the expendable side of that equation, surviving through luck and a stubborn refusal to die. And tomorrow you'll go back to work because the alternative is starving in a ditch somewhere. At least in the stable, the diseases are familiar. The sun is setting on another day that feels exactly like every day before it. And you're carrying your final bucket of water across the stable yard, the 20th, maybe 25th trip today. You've lost count when your legs simply decide they're done. Not dramatically, not with warning. They just stop functioning properly and you stumble, sloshing water everywhere, catching yourself against the stable wall before you fall completely. The bucket handle has worn grooves into your palms that match the grooves from yesterday and the day before, creating calluses on top of calluses until your hands are more scar tissue than skin. You stand there for a moment, breathing heavily, and realize that you can't actually remember what it feels like to not be exhausted. The evening routine is beginning the final feeding, the last stall checks, the settling of horses for the night, and you're moving through it with the mechanical precision of someone who's done these exact movements so many times that thinking is optional. You know which stall comes next without looking, which horse gets which portion without measuring, which sounds mean trouble and which are just normal horse noises. This knowledge hasn't made the work easier, just more automatic, like you've become a machine that runs on porridge and desperation. Darkness, the destrier who kicked your bucket on your second day and has continued being terrible every day since, is watching you from his stall with what you swear is smug satisfaction. He's eaten his expensive grain. He's been groomed until he gleams. He's probably received better care today than you've received in your entire life. You meet his eyes for a moment, something you're not supposed to do. Horses interpret direct eye contact as aggression, and there's a flash of something like understanding between you. Not friendship, not respect, just mutual acknowledgement that you're both trapped in this system, though his cage has significantly better accommodations. The final stall check reveals that Copper the Rouncy, who had colic last week and survived your amateur veterinary care, has a small cut on his leg that you didn't notice this morning. It's not serious, just a scrape probably from kicking the stall wall, but it needs cleaning and monitoring. You fetch water, cloth, and the clay pot of herbal salve that Hugh swears prevents infection. and you crouch beside Kappa's leg to clean the wound. He stands patiently, this horse who's survived colic and poor care and the general chaos of stable life. And you clean the cut with tired hands while trying to remember if you've eaten today. You think you had bread at some point, maybe porridge. It all blurs together. The wound is clean, salve applied, and you're marking it in your mental inventory of things to check tomorrow when you hear Hugh calling for everyone to gather. This is unusual. Hugh doesn't do group meetings unless something significant is happening. You join the other stable hands and grooms in the main aisle, everyone looking wary because unexpected gatherings usually mean bad news or additional work, and both options are unwelcome. Lord Ashford is hosting a tournament next month. Hugh announces, and the collective groan is audible. Tournaments mean extra work, extra horses, extra pressure, and extra opportunities for things to go catastrophically wrong. We'll be housing visiting horses, preparing our destriers for competition, and maintaining equipment for knights from 3 neighboring estates. Starting tomorrow, work shifts extend 2 hours. Every horse will be groomed twice daily. All tack will be treated weekly instead of monthly. He's listing these requirements as if they're reasonable, as if you're not already working from before dawn until after dark, as if there are hidden reserves of energy you've been holding back. But here's the thing about being at the bottom of a medieval hierarchy. Your capacity for suffering is assumed to be infinite. There's always more work to be done, always additional hours to squeeze from your day, always another level of exhaustion to discover. You don't protest because protest is pointless. You don't complain because complaints are insubordination. You just nod along with everyone else and mentally prepare for whatever nightmare the next month holds. The meeting disperses, and you return to your final tasks with the knowledge that final is a temporary concept. There's always something more: a horse that needs checking, a bucket that needs filling, a stall that needs one more pass with the fork. The work is genuinely endless because you're not maintaining a stable state. You're fighting entropy in a system designed to generate chaos. Horses produce waste constantly. Equipment degrades with use. Buildings decay. And your job is to push back against this tide with wooden tools and physical labor until your body gives out. You reach a point where you're too exhausted to continue and declare it finished and make your way to your sleeping corner. The pile of hay that serves as your bed hasn't been refreshed in days. It's compressed and stale and probably home to things that bite, but it's where you sleep because you don't have alternatives. You collapse into it, feeling every muscle protest, every joint ache, every injury from the day make itself known now that adrenaline is fading. The stable settles into its night sounds, horses shifting in their stalls, the creak of wood, the scratch of rats, someone coughing in the loft above. This is your lullaby, this symphony of animal noises and human misery, and you're so accustomed to it that silence would probably keep you awake. Your hands hurt, your back hurts, your feet hurt, everything hurts, but it's a familiar hurt, the constant companion of your existence, and you've learned to sleep through it. You think about the tournament coming, about the extra work and extra hours and the visiting horses who'll need care. You think about Daisy dying in her stall, about the youngest stable boy dying alone in a shed, about Copper surviving against odds and that small victory meaning you get to treat his minor injuries indefinitely. You think about the hunting dogs in their clean kennel, about darkness and his expensive grain, about the hierarchy that keeps you at the bottom scooping manure while others debate which wine to serve at dinner. Historians still argue whether medieval working conditions were sustainable or if the system was constantly churning through workers who broke down and were replaced. You're living evidence for the second theory, though you suppose if you survive your 7-year term, you might argue for the first. Survival bias is real. Those who make it through claim the system works, while those who don't aren't around to contest that narrative. A quirky thought crosses your exhausted mind. In 7 years, when your service is complete, what will you have learned? how to muck stalls efficiently, how to treat horse ailments with medieval remedies, how to navigate a brutal social hierarchy, how to survive on minimal food and sleep, how to endure. These aren't skills that will make you wealthy or respected. They're survival skills for a specific kind of hell, and their main value is that they've kept you alive to learn more survival skills. It's circular and pointless and absolutely the reality of medieval working life. Your eyes are closing despite your intention to stay awake a bit longer, to have a few moments of consciousness that aren't dedicated to work. But exhaustion is a demanding master, and sleep claims you mid-thought, pulling you down into unconsciousness that's more like temporary death than rest. You'll wake in a few hours when the bell rings, and you'll do it all again: the mucking, the grooming, the feeding, the water carrying, the medical emergencies, the casual humiliations, the endless cycle of work that defines your existence. Tomorrow, darkness will probably kick another bucket. The stalls will fill with manure overnight. Something will go wrong because something always goes wrong. And you'll handle it because that's what you do. That's what you've been doing. That's what you'll continue doing until your term ends, or you break, or you die, whichever comes first. The stable is dark now, just the faint glow of a shuttered lantern near Hugh's room providing any light. The horses are mostly settled. They're breathing deep and regular. Somewhere in the distance, you can hear the castle music or voices or the sounds of people who eat full meals and sleep in actual beds and have never scooped manure in their lives. It's a different world, separated from you by walls and social barriers that might as well be mountains. But here, in the hay, in the darkness, in the stable that smells like ammonia and animals and your own unwashed body, there's a strange kind of peace. Not comfort, not happiness, but the peace of knowing exactly where you stand and what's expected, and that you've survived another day in a world designed to consume people like you. It's not much, but it's yours, this pile of hay, this corner of the stable, this exhausted sleep before another identical day begins. The rats are active tonight, scurrying through the walls, searching for grain or nesting material or whatever rats search for. One of them runs across your leg and you don't even flinch anymore. They're part of the environment, like the smell or the cold or the constant ache in your muscles. You've been here long enough that you've stopped being shocked by the conditions and started simply existing within them. Your breathing is slowing, matching the rhythm of the horses, and your last conscious thought is wondering if the 10-year-old who died in the isolation shed had any last thoughts, or if he just slipped away in the fever without awareness. You'll never know. His story ended. Yours continues, and the only difference between you is luck and timing and maybe a slightly stronger constitution. Tomorrow, those factors could reverse. In medieval life, death is always nearby, waiting patiently, and the best you can do is stay useful enough to delay the introduction. The stable is quiet now, settled into the deep silence of night. The horses are dreaming if horses dream off pastures, maybe, or grain, or whatever joy horses can imagine. You're dreaming too, or about to dream, of nothing specific because exhaustion doesn't leave room for elaborate dreams. Just darkness and rest and the temporary escape from consciousness that makes tomorrow possible. And somewhere in that darkness, in that space between waking and sleeping, between one day ending and another beginning, there's a moment of something that's not quite acceptance but isn't quite despair either. It's just continuation, the knowledge that tomorrow will come. You'll wake to the bell. You'll muck the stalls and groom the horses and carry the water and survive another day in a medieval stable where you wouldn't last a day. Except you are lasting. You're doing it one terrible day at a time. Sleep takes you fully now, pulls you under into the black water of unconsciousness where even stable boys get to rest. The horses breathe. The rats scratch. The night moves on toward dawn. And everything waits for the bell that will start it all again. The first hints of dawn are still hours away when your mind begins its slow drift toward waking. not quite ready to surface but no longer deeply under. In this liminal space, you're dimly aware of the stable around you, the warmth of the horses, the musty smell of hay, the particular quality of darkness before dawn. There's no urgency yet, no bell, no Hugh's voice cutting through sleep like a knife. Just the quiet, gentle space where today hasn't quite begun and yesterday has finally released its grip. Your body is learning something your mind already knows. This is what life is now. This stable, these horses, this work that never ends but somehow gets done. The pain in your hands is familiar, almost comfortable in its constancy. The ache in your back is just part of who you are now. You're being shaped by this place, transformed from whoever you were before, a child from a poor family, a village boy, someone with maybe dreams or hopes, into something else. A stable hand, a worker, a survivor of medieval working life who knows the price of survival is everything soft being worn away until only the essential remains. But in this quiet moment, before the bell rings and duty calls and the cycle begins again, there's space for something like contentment. Not happiness that's too strong, too foreign to your current existence. Just the simple animal contentment of being warm enough, being alive, having made it through another day and being about to face another. It's not much, but in a world that gives you so little, you've learned to find peace in the smallest offerings. The stable holds you in its familiar embrace, the smell that used to revolt you but now just smells like home. The sounds that used to frighten you but now provide comfort. The darkness that used to seem oppressive but now feels protective. You're part of this place now, woven into its daily rhythm as surely as the horses and the hay and the endless work. And while you wouldn't have chosen this life, while you dream sometimes of escape or change or simply being anywhere else, there's a strange security in knowing your place, your purpose, your role in this small medieval world. Your breathing is slow and deep, matching the sleeping horses around you. Your muscles are relaxed for perhaps the only time they'll be relaxed all day. Your mind is quiet, free from worry or planning or the constant calculations of how to survive the next task. This moment, this peaceful in-between space, is yours alone, a gift of time before time claims you again. And in this gentle darkness, in this final hour before the bell brings another day of medieval stable life, you rest, truly rest. Let the exhaustion drain away into the hay beneath you. Let the worries about tomorrow stay in tomorrow where they belong. Let yourself simply be a boy sleeping in a stable. Nothing more complicated than that. The work will come. The hierarchy will reassert itself. The horses will need care and the stalls will need mucking and your hands will bleed again from rough tools and rougher treatment. But not yet. Not quite yet. For now, there's just this. The soft sound of horses breathing, the distant promise of dawn, the quiet knowledge that you've survived another day and you'll survive the next one too. However hard it gets, however much it hurts, however many times you think you can't possibly continue, you will. Because that's what stable boys do. That's what you do. You endure. And in enduring, you find a kind of strength that's not heroic or noble or worthy of songs, but it's real and it's yours and it's enough to carry you through one more day in a medieval stable, and then another, and another, until someday far away but real non-ethelesi you'll walk out of here free, your term served, your debt paid, carrying nothing but scars and memories and the unshakable knowledge that you survived what would have broken lesser souls. Sleep deeper now. Let the dawn wait a little longer. Rest while you can. Stable boy, because the bell is coming, and with it, another day. But for this moment, this precious moment before everything begins again, you're at peace. And that's enough. That's everything.